Under the hazy moonlight, a man with a blood-stained face was sitting against the wall, clutching his abdomen tightly. There was a bloody hole there, oozing purple blood that resembled the result of a severe poisoning. His aura was extremely chaotic, his life force weak, seemingly at the end of his tether. It was a human. Even though Xiang Beifei couldn't see the other system interface, he was certain this was a human. A living human. This shocked Xiang Beifei considerably. He hesitated about whether to go over and ask about the situation. But at this moment, the middle-aged man gave a miserable smile and sighed. To think that our grand Hanxia human race has come to such a pass. Alas! Alas! Sounds of battle came from afar. He slightly raised his head to look at the sky. Then it seemed as if several shadows sped across the twin moons above, disappearing into the distance. I must ensure the Tao embryo survives. The middle-aged man murmured with hope in his gaze, but the light in his eyes gradually faded. Encountering a human in such a place was extremely surprising for Xiang Beifei, even if this human wasn't quite the same as those he had encountered before. Nevertheless, Xiang Beifei decided to step forward and find out what was going on. So, he dispelled the spiritual power concealing himself and materialized beside the middle-aged man. Who? Just as Xiang Beifei had revealed himself and hadn't yet had the chance to speak, the blood-stained man suddenly looked up, staring intently at Xiang Beifei, then burst out in a low growl. "It's you again! It's you again?" Xiang Beifei looked around. There was no one else, only him. "Are you talking about me?" He found it strange, as it seemed like the first time he had seen this person before him. Why did it sound like the other recognized him? "May I ask who you are?" Xiang Beifei was just about to ask politely, when suddenly an incredibly terrifying aura burst forth from the man. This aura was so powerful, like surging floodwaters, violently sweeping upward, booming in the air, pressing down on Xiang Beifei. It seemed as though the sky itself was collapsing. He inhaled sharply. The last time he encountered such a terrifying aura was from his grandfather. A mortal realm. Without any hesitation, Xiang Beifei immediately retreated. He hadn't expected to meet someone so eerie and terrifying. The middle-aged man held a sword in one hand, using it to prop himself up as he stood. Despite being at death's door, he looked at Xiang Beifei angrily, as if Xiang Beifei had committed some heinous crime. "You must be mistaken?" Xiang Beifei called out as he retreated. "Your aura, even if it turned to ashes, I would recognize it," the blood-stained man thundered, his eyes becoming extremely red as if viewing Xiang Beifei as a mortal enemy. However, the middle-aged man did not attack. He just stood there, seeming to have exhausted all his strength, unable even to make a final strike. His aura gradually dissipated and quieted down until the last bit of life force completely extinguished. It was like a gust of wind had passed. The man's flesh and clothes gradually corroded away into a wisp of white light and dissipated in the moonlight, leaving nothing but a pile of dry bones. Xiang Beifei leaped back onto the broken city wall and breathed a sigh of relief. Why had that man said, "It's you again," earlier? He found it very odd, as he didn't recall knowing such a person. Could it be a case of mistaken identity? But that didn't seem right either. How could someone so powerful be mistaken? Moreover, it seemed the other party recognized his aura. For someone with such formidable strength, it was certainly not an ordinary encounter, which made it even stranger. Xiang Beifei stood on the wall, staring at the skeleton until he was sure there was no danger. And then he stepped forward, approaching the middle-aged man's bones to inspect them. The bones were jade white, different in texture from those of ordinary people, sculpted like a work of art, inspiring admiration. Has he trained his bones specially? Xiang Beifei couldn't help but think. Even though the man had turned into a skeleton, he still maintained his standing posture, still clutching his sword, and still exuded an aura of resoluteness mixed with a chilling kill intent, prompting a strategic retreat. Xiang Beifei found it impossible to approach the skeleton because its fierce aura hadn't entirely faded and was still intimidating. So powerful! I never expected even a skeleton after death to possess such terrifying might. Xiang Beifei couldn't help but sigh inwardly. He himself was an expert in the later stages of orifice transforming, not necessarily afraid even in the heavenly connection, but this middle-aged man gave him a profound sense of oppression and threat. His grandfather's aura was very strong as well, but he always contained it around his grandson, not affecting Xiang Beifei. However, the skeleton before him was fully bearing its sharp edge. Xiang Beifei observed the skeleton from a distance, noticing a grayish-white ring on the finger of the skeleton. Under the illumination of the twin moons, he could barely make out its rough texture. Unable to approach the skeleton but still wanting to take the ring to examine it, he began to contemplate how to deal with the threatening aura emanating from the bones. Soon, he thought of his own black and white spiritual power, which he had just recently begun to explore, realizing it might not be a bad idea to test it out now. Without delay, he unleashed his black and white spiritual power, extending it forward to block what was ahead. A black and a white stream of spiritual power immediately spiraled out, latching onto the fierce aura. Gradually, the fierce aura emanating from the bones was absorbed by Xiang Beifei's black spiritual power, and as Xiang Beifei drew near, the aura released by the skeleton felt like a gentle breeze brushing against his face, posing no threat whatsoever. However, purifying such an aura clearly required some time. Although he was only 20 meters away from the skeleton, it took him half an hour to approach it. When Xiang Beifei arrived in front of the ominous skeleton, he finally got a clear view of the stone ring. Its patterns were intricately interwoven, resembling a snowflake, and it looked familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. He reached out to remove the ring, but as soon as his fingertips touched the stone ring, it suddenly emitted a strange white light that flashed and disappeared. Xiang Beifei was on high alert, feeling as though something was changing around him. At that moment, a rustling sound suddenly came from the darkness ahead, as if something was rapidly climbing, bustling, and spreading quickly. He immediately became vigilant. Then he saw the sand covering this area come to life once again, rolling along the ground, climbing up the broken walls, and covering all the remnants as though it intended to bury them again. The two moons in the sky grew increasingly bright, with their pale light shining on the sand. The white glow became so intense that it was impossible to see with the eyes, and Xiang Beifei felt as though he was enveloped in a white radiance, unable to distinguish north from south, east from west. However, this sensation didn't last long. It was merely a moment before the light in front of his eyes dissipated completely. When he came to his senses, he found himself standing inside an ancient and quaint room. The room contained a carved wooden bed, an exquisite round table, and the floor was covered with a rug reminiscent of ancient times. What's going on? An illusion. Xiang Beifei frowned slightly and couldn't help but reach out to touch the furniture in the room, trying to ascertain the situation. But the furniture felt very real, and given his powerful spiritual power, this was definitely not an illusion. Woo! But Era muttered something, realizing that it could once again control the wood here, meaning the wood was real. Xiang Beifei grew more puzzled, and at that moment, there were sounds coming from outside the room, as if someone was calling out. Carefully, he approached the lattice window and looked outside. There appeared to be a courtyard outside, with a winding stone path extending to a front arch. The delicate rockery was surrounded by multicolored flowers and plants. A man hurriedly walked along the garden path, muttering to himself, "Big trouble. I must go and ask the master." This man had an air of vigor, his hair tied into a Taoist knot, dressed in a light blue silk robe, his waist cinched with a gray-brown linen belt, adorned with a jade pendant and wearing a pair of black cloth boots. He was clearly dressed in ancient attire. The man seemed in a hurry, as if he was eager to find someone, and quickly disappeared at the end of the path. Xiang Beifei opened a crack in the window and then stepped out, quietly landing on the outside corridor, sizing up his surroundings. The corridor was supported by vermilion pillars, and the roof was adorned with intricate carvings, quite elegant indeed. The floor was made of smooth bluestone, perfectly polished. He walked to the end of the corridor, and seeing no one around, he leaped up, trying to fly to the roof to get a better view. Just then, Several whooshing sounds passed through the air, causing him to halt his motion and land on a banyan tree next to the rockery. It was a group of young men and women, traveling on flying swords, their clothes fluttering elegantly in the wind. These people didn't notice Xiang Beifei. They were discussing something among themselves, hurrying toward the northern direction. Xiang Beifei climbed to the treetop and looked out to see rows upon rows of green-tiled rooftops, numerous courtyards overlapping each other. In the sky, cranes flew by leisurely, and from time to time people traveled on swords. In the distance stood towering mountains, and at the highest point, a solemn and ancient hall stood, within which lurked strong and powerful auras. There was a plaza ahead where many people were landing. Where exactly am I? Xiang Beifei was baffled. He had clearly encountered a suddenly rising island in the desert, so how had he come to this place? He carefully surveyed the layout of this complex, finding it very similar to the island he had just been on. To confirm this, he immediately used his spiritual power to conceal himself and then followed the path in the complex toward the outside. Along the way, he encountered many people hurrying, mostly dressed in ancient attire, but he saw no system interface and felt no system fluctuations. This place was not the world of the system. It seemed more like a land of immortals. Suddenly, the path ahead cleared, and in the distance, several other islands floated in the air, shrouded in mist and clouds. Towering pavilions and terraces stood erect among them, with celestial lights flickering in and out of existence. Counting carefully, including the one under Xiang Beifei's feet, there were exactly 8. He arrived at the edge of the island and looked down. Below was no longer the desolate desert he had seen before, but a vast city with houses of all sizes arranged in an orderly fashion, resembling a bustling ancient metropolis with no end in sight. Is this the former glory of the desert? Xiang Beifei couldn't help but ponder. What was this before his eyes? An image left from the past? In the outer realms, many terrains are quite unique and can record past images with various magnetic fields. During his meridian opening phase, he had encountered a desolate beast that killed using images left from the past. However, Xiang Beifei was clear on how to deal with this situation, which only required his powerful spiritual power to resolve. He immediately gathered his spiritual power and hurled it at a stone in front of him. Crack! The stone shattered directly, but before him still lay a harmonious land of immortals. Xiang Beifei was slightly taken aback. Something was amiss. This was not an illusion created by spiritual power. It looked like a real stone breaking. Who are you? Just then, a booming voice came from behind Xiang Beifei. He turned to look and saw a young man with sword-like brows and eyes, tall and majestic, dressed in a moon-white robe, exuding a valiant spirit in every gesture. That attire of yours, are you from the Yi tribe? The young man became alert upon seeing Xiang Beifei's strange attire. Yi tribe? Xiang Beifei was pondering what this term meant when the young man already made a move against him. What surprised him even more was that he was clearly disguised with his spiritual power. So how could this person see him? Why had his disguise failed? How dare the Yi tribe infiltrate our sacred Hanxia lands, seeking death? Seeing that Xiang Beifei didn't respond, the young man seemed even more convinced that Xiang Beifei was from the so-called Yi tribe, and immediately drew a sword from thin air. The blade glittered fiercely as he thrust it straight toward him. Sword light dazzling, sword chi piercing. The young man was extremely strong in spiritual power, his cultivation actually also in the later stage of orifice transforming, the same realm as Xiang Beifei. Xiang Beifei frowned slightly. The sword thrust by the young man was powerful, steady, filled with an aggressive sword chi, indicating he was well-versed in sword Dao. His swordsmanship was even comparable to Xiang Beifei's. This was a powerful sword cultivator. But he wasn't flustered, calmly watching the sword chi that came flying unexpectedly. The black and white spiritual power quickly swirled out from his body, forming a vortex in front of him, enveloping the adversary's sword gleam. The black and white spiritual power swiftly twisted around the unstoppable long sword, the black spiritual power instantly stripping away the fierce sword chi, leaving only the sword tip. But without the sword chi, the sword tip seemed to Xiang Beifei like a child stabbing with a wooden sword. Xiang Beifei casually extended 2 fingers, gently pinching and firmly trapping the young man's sword. What? The expression of the young man changed. He was already a sword cultivator in the late stage of orifice transforming, and though the burst of sword chi was extremely strong, he didn't expect that it would be so easily clamped by the opponent. The strangest thing was, the sword he controlled seemed to only extend its chi to the blade, while the tip of the sword felt as if it had lost control, utterly devoid of strength, and no matter how he drove his spiritual power, he couldn't manage it. I am not the so-called member of the E-Trib, if you can understand my words, Xiang Beifei said calmly. Still daring to argue. With your strange attire, you are not one of us from the floating immortal isles, but you sneak around and damage our formation stones. Just surrender now, the young man shouted again. Xiang Beifei touched his forehead, now in an awkward situation. He had recognized that the stone was part of a formation, so he had wanted to test it, but he hadn't expected that the people here could actually see him, catching him red-handed and leading to this misunderstanding. The young man tried to pull back his sword to attack Xiang Beifei again, but as soon as he exerted force, he found his sword wouldn't budge, and his hand slipped off the hilt. So powerful. This person has a very high cultivation. He must be a spy from the E-Trib. No, I must notify others. The young man's thoughts raced, and with a loud shout, a powerful fluctuation emanated from his body, accompanied by a sharp cry that exploded above him and traveled far. The signal dispersed, alarming the passers-by in the vicinity. An intruder? Quick! Jing Hong is over there. Many who originally flew past on their swords turned their heads towards this direction upon sensing the disturbance, and saw the figure of Xiang Beifei, immediately turning and rushing over. At that time, several terrifying presences also burst out from a majestic hall in the distance, pressing towards this area. So powerful! Xiang Beifei felt a slight shock in his heart, recognizing them as masters of the heavenly connection realm. Not only that, but among those presences, there seemed to be an overwhelming force, like dark clouds over the city, making him feel extremely oppressed. It was that force again, the immortal realm. Damn! Without any hesitation, Xiang Beifei immediately dropped his sword and turned around to flash away, flying towards the outside of the Isles. If this young man in the orifice transforming stage could deploy spiritual power against him, it meant that other masters of the heavenly connection realm could as well. Facing masters of the heavenly connection realm, he had no chance of winning, let alone when there was also a terrifying great power present. Sect leader, hurry! There's a E-Trib impersonator invading our floating immortal isles, the young man shouted urgently. A powerful presence instantly locked down the entire floating isle. Just as Xiang Beifei thought of leaping off the isle, he saw a terrifying wave of spiritual power blocking his path. Not daring to confront it, he turned and flew towards a vast courtyard, disappearing among the buildings. Whoosh! 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 Almost at the moment Xiang Beifei had fled, numerous powerful figures appeared in the air, landing beside the young man. Each of these individuals had an extraordinary aura, led by several older men with flying beards, looking like immortal elders, vigorous and spirited, but now with solemn expressions. Jing Hong, what happened? An elder in a gray Taoist robe asked in a deep voice. The young man, addressed as Jing Hong, immediately responded respectfully. To the elders, just now, an intruder destroyed our formation stone of the floating immortal isles. Look! Jing Hong pointed to the stone that Xiang Beifei had shattered. The elder in the gray robe said, each formation stone of the floating immortal isles is interconnected, with very powerful defenses. To just destroy one is not easy. But as his gaze fell on the destroyed stone, his expression changed drastically, exclaiming, how is this possible? Even someone in the late stages of heavenly connection shouldn't be able to destroy a formation stone. The formation between each stone was integral, solid as rock. Attempting to destroy one would face the full resistance of the formation, making it practically impossible for ordinary people to break one. Yet this formation stone had been shattered just like that. Among the crowd, a tall middle-aged man wearing a purple gold crown stepped forward, appearing beside the broken stone. This man had a robust and upright stature, an impressive demeanor, and an extremely deep and restrained aura, making it difficult to gauge his strength. He carefully examined the shattered stone, his expression growing more serious. This is a very strange type of spiritual power, never seen before. This force seems to have blocked and cut off other spiritual energies of the formation, then destroyed the stone. The middle-aged man observed sharply, having spotted how Xiang Beifei had demolished the stone. Who would possess such formidable capabilities that could block and cut off the formation of our floating immortal isles? The elder in the gray robe exclaimed in surprise. Jing Hong, where did the intruder go now? The middle-aged man turned and inquired. Feeling the gravity of the situation, a person capable of destroying a formation stone was not ordinary. Sect leader, just after I sent the signal, he immediately fled with great speed. I couldn't stop him, Jing Hong said. I've sealed the floating immortal isles, so he might still be inside. A horrifying orifice perception swept out from the middle-aged man, scanning the area in search of Xiang Beifei. His perception was like a vast ocean, flooding into every corner of the floating immortal isles. No living creature on the island could escape his detection. But very soon, his expression grew increasingly astonished. No one. Orifice perception had searched every nook and cranny of this floating immortal isle, but surprisingly, no one was found? He had actually let him escape. Send the order, lock down the entire floating immortal isles, and enter alert status. The middle-aged man said with a heavy voice. Yes. All the people responded in unison, leaving with serious expressions. The middle-aged man looked at the broken formation stone, lost in thought. Xiang Beifei was hiding inside a large tree, where Era had created a vacuum and then healed the tree without any damage. He then used his black and white orifice perception to protect himself, restoring the tree to its normal appearance. When that terrifying perception had probed just now, it had nearly discovered him. This floating isle was equipped with a very powerful formation, which basically linked all things together, including the trees. Any slight variation in the formation would cause fluctuations. Fortunately, Xiang Beifei relied on a brick and his own black and white spiritual power to infiltrate the formation within the tree, and then swiftly restore normality. The other party probably didn't expect Xiang Beifei to hide inside the tree. The abnormality of the tree was not detected, as the orifice perception merely rippled over it without lingering too much. That was close. The perception just now was so strong that even he wasn't sure whether he could evade it. He had used his powerful spiritual power to hide himself, yet he was still seen by that young man. And that young man wasn't even as strong as him. Not to mention the master of that powerful orifice perception. There was definitely something strange about this place. Owo, Era inquired. I don't know how I got here either. It was just touching that ring. Maybe the ring signifies something, Xiang Beifei speculated. It seemed that the ring had transported him to this place. If the ring had induced an illusion, that would be one thing, but what was weird was that he was actually able to fight with the other person and even alert them. This didn't seem like something an illusion could achieve. For now, they were trapped here with no better way out. They could only hide in the tree for a while to avoid the immediate danger and think about how to leave the isle. The floating immortal isles seemed to have entered a state of alert, as everyone was searching for the intruder. To find Xiang Beifei, the E-tribe's insider. They searched for 2 whole days, leaving no stone unturned. During this time, they even came to inspect Xiang Beifei's hiding spot, the tree, to check whether it was still part of the formation. After confirming that it was still connected, they left, for there were thousands of trees on the island, and they couldn't possibly focus only on this one. But during these 2 days, Xiang Beifei wasn't just hiding. He sent Xiaohe out to gather information. Fortunately, Xiaohe's ability to become invisible was still unbeatable, allowing it to roam everywhere without being detected, as long as it was careful not to disturb the formation. Xiang Beifei also relied on his own perception to stealthily eavesdrop on conversations outside. Many people went back and forth discussing the search, piecing together bits of conversation with Xiaohe's intelligence. He finally got a preliminary grasp of the place. This was a sect of immortal cultivators named the Floating Immortal Sect, located on 8 massive floating isles which they called the Floating Immortal Isles. At this moment, Xiang Beifei was on one of them, which seemed to be the main isle. The Floating Immortal Isles were full of powerful cultivators who also called themselves Taoists. The sect was teeming with masters. Leaving aside those with relatively lower strength, just within these few days, Xiang Beifei had perceived 321 experts in the orifice transforming stage, 63 in the heavenly connection realm, and their sect leader Taoist Qingyang was an expert in the immortal realm. But that was just the number of masters on one isle. Because an intruder had been detected here, many masters had specifically come from other isles. With a total of 8 isles, multiplying the number of the orifice transforming and heavenly connection realm experts by a few times was not an unreasonable estimate by Xiang Beifei. Beneath the Floating Immortal Isles was a large human race country named Hanxia. Hanxia Kingdom was inhabited by countless ordinary humans, most of whom were ordinary people without cultivation. The Floating Immortal Isles immortals protected Hanxia Kingdom. In this vast wilderness, numerous E-tribes would invade Hanxia Kingdom. It was the duty of the Floating Immortal Sect to resist the E-tribes and protect the people of Hanxia. As for what E-tribe meant, Xiang Beifei was not entirely sure. Over these past 2 days of hiding, everyone had been searching for him as a member of the E-tribe, but he was not quite clear on why he was called a E-tribe. Was it simply because he was wearing clothes completely different from those of these ancient people? The human race of this place is actually also this strong. Xiang Beifei couldn't help but think to himself. Overall, it seemed that the strength of the Floating Immortal Isles was about the same as that of Zhuzhou, perhaps even stronger. Zhuzhou also had many orifice transforming stage experts, probably in the thousands, while there were fewer heavenly connection realm masters, roughly 50 to 60 people, mostly in the Alliance and elite universities. But there were no immortal realm masters in Zhuzhou. Strictly speaking, there might be one, if the amnesic Xiang Qingde could be counted. The similarity in strength scale between this ancient immortal sect and Zhuzhou greatly surprised Xiang Beifei. Other than these people's ancient clothing, behavior, and etiquette, as well as the lack of a system, relying solely on self-cultivation, many things were very similar to the people of Zhuzhou. He had also not expected to encounter such a strange place in the foreign wilderness. Xiang Beifei really wanted to go out and ask, but considering he had inexplicably become a fugitive, and with so many experts outside, he was certain he wouldn't be able to clear things up if he did go out. So he opted to cultivate within the tree and wait for the situation to die down before venturing out. However, he didn't have to wait long. On the 4th day of hiding in the tree, the outside suddenly became very noisy, as if something important had happened. Quick! Block them off! How did the E-tribe get in here? It must be that E-tribe spy who sneaked in the other day causing trouble. We can't let them destroy us, Hanxia human race. Countless cultivators were shouting in alarm and anger. Intense spiritual power fluctuations spreading to every corner of the isle. It was as if there was a huge impact from outside. The whole isle rumbling, even the ground trembling. Qingyang, you Hanxia human race have violated the heavenly Tao, insulted the heavenly might. The deities are outraged, and we are here on behalf of the heavenly God to punish you. A gloomy voice rolled in like muffled thunder, deafening, echoing through the skies, resounding in every corner of the Floating Immortal Isles. How dare you, eternal night! You E-tribe are seeking death. The dignified voice of Taoist Qingyang, the sect leader of the Floating Immortal Sect, also rose to the heavens, breaking the clouds above the Floating Immortal Isles, a terrifying pressure spreading to every corner of the isle. Boom! 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 2 powerful auras collided in the sky, the explosive impact causing the massive Floating Immortal Isles to shake. But at that moment, 7 or 8 powerful pressures suddenly burst forth in the sky, trembling like thunder, striking towards Taoist Qingyang's momentum. His momentum became unstable at once, and the previously immensely powerful formation of the Floating Immortal Isles shook violently, trembling fiercely again. It seems you hold me, Qingyang, in high regard, mobilizing such a grand force. The voice of Taoist Qingyang was full of anger. Ha ha ha! Qingyang, the human race has violated the heavenly Tao. We of the moon god race are commanded by the heavens, specifically here to carry out the heavenly Tao. A chilling laughter spread ominously across the entire sky. What audacity to carry out the heavenly Tao! How many races have you? A group only capable of destruction, annihilated under the pretense of carrying out the heavenly Tao. If you desire the Tao embryo, just say it outright. Why beat around the bush? Qingyang shouted angrily. Human race, you are the next race that needs to face justice. Enough talk. Hand over the Tao embryo. We'll have to see if you have the ability. Boom, boom, boom. The terrifying auras intertwined again in the sky, shaking the heavens and the earth, causing the formation of the floating immortal isles to start cracking, with the sound of snaps and cracks. Countless trees and buildings collapsed, and the tree where Xiang Beifei had been hiding also shattered, forcing him to burrow out. Xiang Beifei had just emerged from the trees when the battle outside seemed to have already begun. Many people on floating immortal isles had rushed out. Those with high strength had gone outside to resist the powerful enemies, while those with lower strength had gone below to rescue the civilians. No one had time to pay attention to him anymore. He dusted himself off and looked outside. Beyond floating immortal isles, it seemed to have become very chaotic. The sky was no longer filled with drifting white clouds and faint immortal aura, but was covered with dense dark clouds. Powerful spiritual power stirred within the clouds, creating vortex after vortex, with purple lightning continuously flashing, shrouding the air with a layer of gloom. In order not to draw attention to his unusual attire, he ran into a room and found a similar set of clothes to put on, dressing in an old-fashioned manner, before he blended into the crowd and flew towards the outside. As soon as he left floating immortal isles, Xiang Beifei realized that the scene in front of him was one of devastation. Various shapes and colors of desolate beasts filled the sky, most of which were beings very familiar to Xiang Beifei. Ugly monsters with yellow meat wings, together with a sky full of black demon tentacles, continuously attacked the humans holding swords. Meat-winged monsters and ghost mustache of remnant visage. These creatures. Xiang Beifei slightly furrowed his brow. When he had heard the words Eternal Night earlier, he realized that it was the Eternal Night Sovereign who had made a pact with Huangquan. He hadn't expected these ugly creatures to come here. Boom, boom, boom. The cities of Hanxia Kingdom were shrouded in smoke, with many innocent people wailing and screaming. Facing the Yi tribe, they were completely helpless and terrified. They were just ordinary people who could only watch as the meat-winged monster springs of the netherworld submerged houses, devouring them whole. The tentacles of the ghost mustache of remnant visage wreaked havoc in the towns within the city, destroying one house after another. Calls for help from humans were heard everywhere. The cultivators of floating immortal sect did their best to combat these meat-winged monsters and tentacle monsters, while also trying to rescue the ordinary people. However, due to their divided attention, many cultivators were pierced through the body by sudden tentacle attacks, then torn apart, dying at the hands of ghost mustache of remnant visage. The battle was extremely fierce, with flesh and blood flying everywhere. Many meat-winged monsters and ghost mustaches of remnant visage were also killed, but not nearly as many as the defenseless civilians. In the distance, two demon gods were terrifying to the extreme. A yellow aura stretched for thousands of miles, covering the entire sky, radiating an astonishingly powerful aura. On the other side was a horrifying red tentacle mass, like a massive monster with countless octopus legs, encircling another part of the sky. Taoist Qingyang, the head of the floating immortal sect, stood there alone, facing the two demon gods. He wielded only a sword, his figure slim, his face resolute. The most powerful person of the Hanxia human race was only him, and no one else could intervene in that battlefield. Three cultivators of the immortal realm. At that moment, Taoist Qingyang had a shocking wound on his chest, having obviously already exchanged blows. Facing the two demon gods, he had suffered a setback, but the auras of Eternal Night Sovereign and Demon Tentacle King were also greatly disturbed. having gained no advantage. Woof! Xiaohei turned its head and asked if they should go help. Era also couldn't wait to have a fight with these creatures. Xiang Beifei was silent for a moment before shaking his head and saying, "Perhaps we cannot change anything." From a distance, he had noticed Taoist Qingyang's familiar sword, as well as the hand that grasped the sword. On the ring finger of his right hand, he wore a stone ring. It was the person with a face smeared in blood whom he had first met in the ruins of the island. Xiang Beifei could not be certain what his arrival here meant, whether it was an illusion or a memory of the past of floating immortal isles. But he clearly knew, whether it had once been a relic of the human race or not, Hanxia Kingdom and floating immortal sect had been destroyed, leaving nothing but bones buried in yellow sand, a sinking wasteland. If he was just entering a past illusion now, then it would be useless to take action. It would be unwise to put his energy into an illusion of the past. Seeing those defenseless humans being slaughtered by Ghost Mustache of Remnant Visage and meat-winged monsters truly pained his heart. After all, he was human, and no matter what, these were his own race, being slaughtered like livestock, which made him involuntarily clench his fists. Still, he took a deep breath and reminded himself not to act impulsively. He could not save these people because the outcome had already been decided. Even if he wanted to avenge these people, he had to aim to kill the real meat-winged monsters and Ghost Mustache of Remnant Visage. This was a battle of uneven strength. The human race's combat power was actually very strong, but the battle power of the meat-winged monsters and Ghost Mustache of Remnant Visage was not weak at all. Clearly well prepared, they somehow breached the defenses of Hanxia Kingdom, invading and massacring the unarmed civilians, catching all the cultivators of floating immortal sect off guard. The battle was brutal, with the stench of blood permeating the air, swords shining, and spiritual power sweeping. The clash between Taoist Qingyang and the two demon gods was the focus of the battlefield. All members of floating immortal sect were aware that their master was the key to this battle. Only if Taoist Qingyang could defeat Demon Tentacle King and Eternal Night Sovereign could he save the entire Hanxia Kingdom. Qingyang, hand over the Tao embryo of your human race, and I can grant you a swift end. Eternal Night Sovereign gestured, and a sky full of netherworld water mixed with a ghastly corrosive aura pressed down towards Taoist Qingyang. Taoist Qingyang brandished his long sword fearlessly, his sword intent fierce as a divine rainbow, slicing through the netherworld water curtain. However, the red demon tentacles from above thundered down, blocking Taoist Qingyang's sword chi. The tentacles were as hard as steel, matching Taoist Qingyang's strength. Boom! An explosion erupted from within the waters of the netherworld, as countless monstrous creatures struggled and burst forth, lunging at Taoist Qingyang. But with just a cold shout, a divine light spread from his body, transforming into mysterious ripples that completely shattered the creatures. Taoist Qingyang pushed out a palm in return. The palm wind turned into a massive force, like a great mountain crashing down on the monsters, suppressing them all. Facing two adversaries, he was by no means weaker, truly a formidable force to be reckoned with. What exactly is a Tao embryo? Xiang Beifei was very puzzled. He did not understand the meaning of Tao embryo, but the Ghost Mustache of Remnant Visage and the meat-winged monster clearly aimed to usurp it under the guise of enforcing justice. How important could this thing be to the E tribe? But the battle situation grew increasingly tragic, and the human race was on the verge of collapse. Countless people were slain, and the remaining cultivators retreated, bringing the survivors toward the floating immortal isles, which now served as their last line of defense. The commoners without cultivation were trembling on the floating immortal isles, originally a domain of immortals, a place they would never dream of setting foot in. Yet their first visit unfolded amid the survival crisis of the human race. Qingda, activate the floating immortal formation. Protect everyone. Taoist Qingyang turned and shouted. Amidst the battlefield, one person bravely charged out. With a wave of his hand, he tore 3 demon tentacles of Heavenly Connection Realm to shreds, anxiously looking towards Taoist Qingyang. Senior brother, could it be that you? I'll hold them back. Protect everyone. Protect the Tao embryo. It's the hope of the human race. It must not fall into the hands of the E tribe. Taoist Qingyang shouted. With gritted teeth, the man once again raised his sword, smashing two meat-winged monsters, and charged toward the floating immortal isles. Xiang Beifei paused for a moment when he saw the stone sword in the man's hand. Why did that stone sword look so familiar? He glanced at the broken woofing sword in his own hand, then at the intact stone sword of the other person, taking in a sharp breath before looking at the sword's owner. The man had an extraordinary bearing, appeared to be in his 30s, and was exceptionally handsome. On closer inspection, his features bore a 7-parts resemblance to Xiang Beifei's own. Then Xiang Beifei realized was that his grandfather in his younger days? Xiang Beifei hadn't recognized his grandfather initially. The difference between the aged, white-haired old man and a young man was too stark. He had never before imagined what his grandfather might have looked like in his youth. But why was his grandfather here? Xiang Beifei had no time to think further because Taoist Qingde rushed into the ruins, lifting 7 or 8 people who still breathed and flying toward the floating immortal isles. Meanwhile, the 8 floating immortal isles had already begun to move, emanating intense formation fluctuations. Golden lights shone forth from the 8 isles, interlinking with one another, preparing to seal off the floating immortal isles. Other meat-winged monsters and ghostly visages approached the floating immortal isles, attempting to overrun them. But the cultivators on the isles fought valiantly at the edges to fend off these invaders. Waves of foul-smelling netherworld water engulfed person after person. Yet the cultivators fought back without fear, defending their last inch of territory. Xiang Beifei saw a ghostly visage snatch away a cultivator in the god-refining stage. He slapped the ghostly visage to pieces, saving the cultivator, and then withdrew to the floating immortal isles. "Thank you." The young, pale-faced cultivator who bore invisible wounds expressed his gratitude to Xiang Beifei. Xiang Beifei shook his head slightly, unsure if saving people now was the right choice. But there was no time for doubt. The most pressing matter was to figure out this Taoist Qingde situation. He had a feeling the answer he had sought for so long might be found here. The young man did not concern himself with why Xiang Beifei seemed unfamiliar. The scene was too chaotic with so many people around. As long as Xiang Beifei wasn't dressed in modern clothing, no one paid him any extra attention. Xiang Beifei wove through the crowd, running towards Taoist Qingde, and soon arrived in front of the Grand Hall on the main aisle of the floating immortal isles. At that moment, Taoist Qingde was hovering mid-air, hands interwoven, rotating and releasing golden formation patterns from his palms. These patterns linked the 8 floating immortal isles together, creating an 8 trigrams pattern resembling unbreakable Bagua defenses. Golden ripples appeared and spread out, firmly protecting the 8 isles. The ghost whiskers and meat-winged monsters were kept outside the isles, unwilling to give up easily. They gathered formidable spiritual power, bombarding the defenses, trying to breach them. And within the island, numerous ghost whiskers of remnant visage and meat-winged monsters were still wantonly slaughtering humans. Many people had been disemboweled and met their fate at the hands of these E-Trib creatures. "Kill all the E-Trib on the island," Taoist Qingde commanded. "Kill!" Human race cultivators, in order to protect their people, roared with rage, their sword chi sharp and their brilliance covering the sky, fighting to the death against these E-Trib invaders. But there were too many meat-winged monsters and ghost whiskers of remnant visage on the island, with dozens of them at the heavenly connection level. Seeing that Taoist Qingde had sealed off the floating immortal isles, they immediately gathered their spiritual power and launched a fierce attack on Taoist Qingde. Other heavenly connection elders rushed forward, blocking these ghost whiskers of remnant visage, but 3 managed to break through the other elders' defenses and charged at Taoist Qingde, who was maintaining the formation. Puqi. Taoist Qingde had to maintain the 8 trigrams array and couldn't dodge. His back was eroded by netherworld water, creating a deep wound exposing bone, and he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of fresh blood. At that moment, he seemed to be only at the heavenly connection level of cultivation. Facing 2 opponents of the same realm was by no means an easy feat. "Taoist Qingde, you might as well die." A heavenly connection level ghost whisker of remnant visage sneered with sinister glee, its body surrounded by strong, red demon tentacles as it surged toward Taoist Qingde again. Damn beast! Xiang Beifei rushed over hastily. Although deep down he knew he might not change anything, when it came to his grandfather, he still decided to take action. Since he could converse with the people here, perhaps he could learn some things about the past. The air was filled with the pungent odor of netherworld water. Xiang Beifei waved his woofing broken sword, splitting a meat-winged monster in half, then immediately turned towards the formation of the floating immortal isles. In recent days, he had not been idle and had continuously studied formations, looking for a quiet way to leave. He understood the construction features of the floating immortal isles formation. Presently, he took out 2 bricks and struck them together. Dong! With a muffled sound, golden formation patterns surged rapidly, spreading out like a spiderweb, adhering to the formation. Then, utilizing the formation's propagation, it surged towards where Taoist Qingde was. Taoist Qingde knew he could not let go. Otherwise, the floating Immortal Isles formation would collapse directly, and the situation would worsen if the outside E-Trib charged in again. He initially planned to withstand the blow, but at that instant, the golden formation patterns spread rapidly, attaching to his hands. What is this? Taoist Qingde was taken aback. Taoist Qingde found the formation patterns being forcefully reinforced, as if a powerful presence was aiding him. He thought it might be Taoist Qingyang, but Taoist Qingyang was still fighting 2 demon gods outside. It was not him. So where did this powerful formation come from? Without time to ponder, seeing the floating Immortal Isles formation reinforced meant he didn't need to withstand the attack. He turned around and reached into the air, pulling out the woofing stone sword from midair and slashing at the sweeping red tentacles. Crack! The heavenly connection level red tentacles shattered on contact, turning into dust. Those who offend Hanxia shall be killed without mercy. Taoist Qingde growled, his fierce and formidable aura vibrating through the air. He thrust his woofing stone sword out plainly, without any superfluous flair. However, the heavenly connection level red ghost whisker of remnant visage was horror-struck, overcome by the edge of the woofing sword's aura. Crack! 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 The red tentacles on that ghost whisker of remnant visage each cracked like porcelain and burst into powder with a bang. Heavenly connection late-stage ghost whisker of remnant visage, slain with a single sword strike. Enraged, Taoist Qingde displayed a terrifying level of strength. After killing one of the ghostly visage ghost whiskers, the other 2 heavenly connection realm ghostly visage ghost whiskers and meat-wing monster were greatly shocked and realized this man should not be provoked. They immediately joined forces to confront Taoist Qingde. Yet, with his woofing stone sword, Taoist Qingde was able to suppress these 2 creatures from the E-Tribe. At this time, on the other side, 2 heavenly connection realm elders from the human race were ambushed by 4 meat-winged monsters, screaming in horror as they were entangled by netherworld creatures and dragged into the River of Souls, meeting their demise at once. After killing the 2 human experts, the 4 heavenly connection realm meat-winged monsters immediately turned their attention to Taoist Qingde. Not only that, the 2 human race elders who perished in the netherworld water transformed into netherworld beasts with immense strength. Gradually losing their sanity, they began to wreak havoc on their own kind. Suddenly, Taoist Qingde found himself besieged by 8 heavenly connection realm experts. Even with his late-stage heavenly connection realm ability, he soon began to falter, retreating step by step under the onslaught. Boom! Boom! Red tentacles and netherworld water twisted in the air, encircling Taoist Qingde. These monsters collaborated closely, creating spiritual power fluctuations that were truly terrifying. In the heart of the island, Taoist Qingde knew he had to ensure his fight with these monsters wouldn't affect everyone else. Thus, he controlled his spiritual power, which made him even more constrained in battle. Whoosh! 7 or 8 powerful netherworld beasts roared and lunged at Taoist Qingde, engaging in a fight to the death since they had already died once and feared nothing. Even as the woofing stone sword slew them, the creatures behind fearlessly pressed on. The stone sword in Taoist Qingde's hand flashed with a green gleam as sword chi slashed everywhere. Below was the island where countless humans were locked in combat with the remaining E-Tribe. He could completely eliminate the netherworld beasts before him with a full-force strike, but those people below would be caught in the crossfire. Left with no choice, he directed the edge of his sword elsewhere, giving another ghostly visage ghost Whiskers the chance to strike. Its red tentacles, strong as iron, slammed into Daoist Qingda. Splurt! Daoist Qingda's ribs broke in several places, his blood pouring freely. Clenching his teeth, he was suddenly pounced upon from behind by another netherworld beast, which bared its sharp teeth at Daoist Qingda's neck. But at that moment, golden formation patterns surged upwards, blocking the creature. As the beast's fanged teeth touched the golden formation, the patterns rapidly spread across its body, causing its bite to pause momentarily. This beast was of the heavenly connection realm and stronger than Xiang Beifei. It immediately began to resist this binding power. However, it gave Daoist Qingda the chance to react. With a sweep of Wufing, the netherworld beast was cleaved into dust. "I've got your back." Xiang Beifei's voice rang out beside Daoist Qingda's ear, and soon after, the formation of the floating immortal isles, carrying golden patterns, appeared in front of them, separating their battleground so the spiritual power of the fight would not reach the people below. Surprise flickered in Daoist Qingda's eyes as he now saw Xiang Beifei holding a brick, astonished by his abilities. However, without time to ponder further, his spirits lifted, and the sword chi of Wufing surged anew. Daoist Qingda once again shattered a netherworld beast, the scattering sword chi spreading towards the crowd below. But soon, golden formation patterns swirled in the air catching these strands. The power of the late-stage heavenly connection realm was formidable. Even the residual waves of sword chi were formidable, and not even the brick's golden formation could completely withstand them. Nonetheless, the formation weakened their might, which then fell onto a mass of black and white spiritual power that went on to further dissolve the sword chi. By the time the sword chi passed through the black and white spiritual power, its dispersal had weakened to nothing more than a strong breeze, harmless to the people below. "Unleash your full strength," shouted Xiang Beifei. Confident that Xiang Beifei could handle the residual sword chi, Daoist Qingda's eyes brightened. No longer holding back, his expression filled with murderous intent, he lunged at one of the meat-winged monsters. Rustle! Another meat-winged monster was torn apart and devoured by its own netherworld water. Once Daoist Qingda could fight unhindered, his momentum surged, and he began to turn the tide against the 8 or 9 heavenly connection realm experts. Incredible! Xiang Beifei couldn't help but inwardly exclaim as he watched Daoist Qingda fight more and more valiantly. Such a battle was beyond his current level of cultivation. He could only rely on Daoist Qingda himself to resolve it. Yet, after a moment's consideration, he turned his gaze to other meat-winged monsters and ghostly visage ghost Whiskers elsewhere on the island. Numerous E-tribe members remained on the island, striking without restraint to annihilate the human race. But the cultivators had to protect their people, thus fighting with their hands tied and suffering heavy casualties. Xiang Beifei immediately began manipulating his black and white spiritual power to attempt to transform the sword chi overflow from Daoist Qingda. Counterstrike. The cultivation technique taught to him by Professor Guo was modified by his black and white spiritual power and put into full effect. The stray sword chi was potent. A complete counterstrike was impractical. Therefore, he filtered a portion of the lethal intent with his black and white spiritual power to the extent that he could bear, then used the flow of spiritual power to start converting it into his own offensive might. When Daoist Qingda's sword chi reached a limit in its circulation, he immediately redirected the sword chi back out. Below, a mid-stage orifice transforming meat-winged monster was cackling sinisterly, surrounding 2 human race experts of the same realm. Both were mid-stage orifice transforming elders, already very powerful. However, having sold themselves as slaves to the underworld, these creatures gained strength beyond their realm by utilizing the waters of the underworld. Thus, a mid-stage orifice transforming meat-winged monster was equivalent to a late-stage orifice transforming master, thrashing the 2 human masters terribly. Both were elderly warriors from the floating immortal sect, their hair white as snow, with vast combat experience. Unfortunately, their strength was still not enough, and one of the elders even had his arm torn off. D. The meat-winged monster laughed triumphantly, controlling the underworld creatures, and grabbed the two elders from the floating immortal sect, intending to tear them apart. But just then, a powerful sword chi swept through the air. Whoosh! The head of the meat-winged monster flew off, tracing an arc through the air, constantly rotating, with a smile still on its face. But a hint of shock appeared in its eyes, not understanding why its head had flown off. The underworld creatures, initially about to tear apart the elders, suddenly lost control and immediately turned their attention to the headless meat-winged monster. To them, devouring the master that controlled them was clearly more tempting than tearing apart a human. So all the underworld creatures rushed toward the headless meat-winged monster. The two elders from the floating immortal sect, having narrowly escaped death, looked at the headless meat-winged monster being revolted by the underworld creatures, feeling fortunate but also wondering who had saved them. Without hesitation, they immediately swung their swords and attacked the out-of-control underworld creatures, aiming to destroy them while they were fighting amongst themselves. Whoosh! 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 In the skies above the floating immortal isles, Daoist Qingde was using all his might to duel with a heavenly connection realm monster, while below, Xiang Beifei utilized the redirected sword chi that spilled out to strike at other meat-winged monsters and ghost mustache of remnant visage. Daoist Qingde, a late-stage heavenly connection realm cultivator, was an extremely strong practitioner. Although the chi that spilled from him was ineffective against experts of the heavenly connection realm, it was lethal for meat-winged monsters and ghost mustache of remnant visage in the orifice-transforming realm and below, especially those in the god-refining and meridian-opening stages of the E-tribe. Merely getting grazed by a bit of Qingde's leaked sword chi would obliterate them. As Qingde dealt with other heavenly connection realm adversaries of the E-tribe, Xiang Beifei recycled his leaked sword chi, precisely guiding and striking, immediately annihilating a large group of meat-winged monsters and ghost mustache of remnant visage. The wooden Kirin and Xiaohei also charged out, joining the battlefield. Era, now stepping into the orifice-transforming phase, had his strength greatly enhanced, wielding his large tail like a fly swatter in the air, with a series of slaps, with each slap precise, more flexible than the tentacles of ghost mustache of remnant visage. Since this wasn't a mound, Xiaohei couldn't use mound spirits to combat these creatures. But that didn't stop Xiaohei from riding atop Era's head, barking encouragements. After barking twice, Xiaohei remembered his thick skin and flesh, not afraid of the corrosive underworld water, then boldly barked loudly, charging into the underworld waters to fight the underworld creatures. Bang! 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 Inside the underworld waters, Xiaohei, like a wolf among sheep, a plague descending, made the normally ferocious underworld creatures inexplicably fear him. Xiaohei wildly bit at them in the waters, causing them to panic and become utterly disorganized. And with the underworld creatures in disarray, the strength of the meat-winged monsters was greatly reduced. Meanwhile, the cultivators seized the opportunity to launch a counterattack. Crack! Crack! Many meat-winged monsters were immediately slain by the cultivators. The meat-winged monsters relied on the netherworld water's enhancement to exhibit strength beyond their own realm, so they specifically targeted opponents within their realm, allowing them to outnumber and dominate. However, once the netherworld creatures lost control, their strength reverted, and they were essentially getting beaten up. As long as Xiaohei dived into the netherworld water controlled by any meat-winged monster, the creatures in the water would go into disarray, leading to more and more meat-winged monsters being taken down by the cultivators. Apart from the netherworld creatures, there were also several extremely troublesome ghost whiskers. With dense tentacles that just kept regenerating no matter how many were cut off, it's tough to handle them. But fortunately, as the number of meat-winged monsters sharply decreased, more cultivators became available to tackle the ghost whiskers. With Xiaohei's covert operations against the netherworld creatures, Xiang Beifei focused all his energy on the ghost whiskers. Dealing with these tentacled beasts was his area of expertise, and he didn't even need mound spirits, just overpowered them directly with sword chi. Bang! 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 Another large batch of ghost whiskers was wiped out by Xiang Beifei, and the situation on the island gradually turned in his favor. Above, Taoist Qingda and the remaining Heavenly Connection Realm warriors of the E-tribe were fiercely battling. Although they had the upper hand, the meat-winged monsters and ghost whiskers were resisting stubbornly like cockroaches. Xiaohei, go help! Xiang Beifei shouted. Woof! Xiaohei was busy biting off a netherworld monster's nose in a pool of netherworld water, and the creature didn't even dare to resist. Upon hearing the command, Xiaohei bit off the monster's nose and leaped out, dashing towards the battlefield above. Nobody noticed a white little ghost head flashing across the sky, not even those Heavenly Connection Realm meat-winged monsters and ghost whiskers. Taoist Qingda was locked in combat with waves of netherworld creatures. These creatures were formidable, and under the meat-winged monster's command, they were not easily killed by Taoist Qingda. All the netherworld creatures had learned to cooperate. They fought closely together. Even if one was smashed to bits, another would immediately shield it. At that moment, Xiaohei bared his teeth as he emerged. The strong fluctuations of spiritual power in the air prevented Xiaohei from getting close. Xiang Beifei immediately directed the golden formations towards a meat-winged monster. The Heavenly Connection Realm meat-winged monster was clearly unafraid of these golden formations, forcibly smashing through the golden patterns with its own strength. But Xiaohei took advantage of the situation, leaping from the golden formation into the netherworld water and charging at those netherworld creatures. The netherworld monsters, originally fiercely surrounding Taoist Qingda, suddenly felt something amiss and turned their heads. Woof! Xiaohei let out a milky bark. The sound, though akin to a whining puppy, struck the netherworld monsters like a dull thunder, making them involuntarily shudder. Xiaohei pounced, frightening the netherworld monsters so much that they no longer cared about attacking Taoist Qingda and turned to flee. This sudden turn stunned the meat-winged monsters controlling the netherworld creatures. They didn't even understand what was happening or why their netherworld monsters were suddenly out of control. But Taoist Qingda didn't give the meat-winged monsters time to react. Seizing the moment he noticed the anomaly, he immediately took his chance with a sword strike, cleaving 4 meat-winged monsters apart. With the meat-winged monsters slain, the strength of the Heavenly Connection Realm ghost whiskers on the other side instantly diminished. They were no match for Taoist Qingda who, with his overwhelming strength, eradicated the remaining ghost whiskers in moments. All the ghost whiskers and meat-winged monsters on the floating immortal isles had been utterly annihilated. Yet, outside, countless more meat-winged monsters and ghost whiskers were eagerly attempting to break through the defense of the 8 floating immortal isles. However, the island's formations, flickering with golden patterns, acted like a solid barrier keeping the dangers at bay. These formations protected the floating immortal isles, the last refuge of the Hansha human race. Xiang Beifei also breathed a sigh of relief, sitting down on a stone to rest, as the dispersed sword chi from earlier had exhausted him. However, it wasn't long before Taoist Qingda had already landed in front of him, staring at him intently. Xiang Beifei just sat on the wall of the ruined floating immortal grand hall. At this moment, the once majestic and solemn great hall had already become a pile of ruins, with the roof overturned and a mess inside. The vermilion pillars in the hall were also corroded and cracked by the yellow spring water. Each of us from the Hansha human race is branded at birth with the human race mark. You are not from Hansha. Taoist Qingda stared at Xiang Beifei and said, The barren land is very dangerous, with the moon god race and the demon tentacle race able to disguise themselves as humans. Branding the mark of the human race is meant to distinguish friend from foe, to avoid accidental harm, which is why Xiang Beifei was initially treated as a member of the E-tribe. Xiang Beifei shook his head and admitted, No. Then why have you come? Taoist Qingda continued to ask. Xiang Beifei said, Just traveling by and happened to pass through here. Traveling by? Within 10,000 miles of our Hansha kingdom, there are no other human races. Hansha is the only human race within the desolate land, Taoist Qingda said. This place was the barren land, filled with powerful desolate beasts and the E-tribe. Taoist Qingda had of course searched within 10,000 miles but saw no other human races, and he remained skeptical of Xiang Beifei's origins. Yet, Aside from not having the brand of the Hanxia human race, the aura emanating from Xiang Beifei's body was unmistakably human. I come from a very distant place. Xiang Beifei thought of his long journey and said, all the way north, and I just happened to encounter you all. All the way north. So you came from the south. Taoist Qingde looked at Xiang Beifei, a hint of a strange light flickering in his eyes. Suppose so? Xiang Beifei said. Why did you help us, Hanxia? We are the same human race, aren't we? In fact, Xiang Beifei had initially not wanted to intervene, for this place seemed like the past events of the floating immortal isles, like an illusion, where intervention seemed meaningless. It was only after seeing Taoist Qingde, and the Wufeng longsword still unbroken in his hand, that he realized this represented his grandfather's youthful image. Speaking of which, why did those meat-winged monsters and tentacle monsters break in? Xiang Beifei asked. Taoist Qingde shook his head and said, no matter how solid the defense is, there are flaws. We have always been very careful, but we never expected to be infiltrated from within, breaking the Great Wall of Hanxia's outer defenses. Is there also a Great Wall in the outer parts of Hanxia? Xiang Beifei was puzzled. Taoist Qingde looked down. All the structures on the 8 floating immortal isles had been destroyed by the Yi tribe into ruins. Those who survived were still huddled together in fear, watching the meat-winged monsters and ghost mustache of remnant visage that were eyeing them covetously outside. Many cultivators were gravely injured, receiving treatment there, and many ordinary people without cultivation were even on their last breath. Those who survived were still fraught with fear. They had not yet escaped danger. 5 million of our human race brethren, Taoist Qingde murmured to himself. Hanxia had over 5 million people, but this sudden attack by the Yi tribe had left countless dead or injured. Looking across the 8 floating immortal isles, only 50 to 60,000 people remained. Those who survived had been rescued onto the floating immortal isles, and those left outside were almost certainly dead. For the human race, this was a devastating blow. The population plummeted to 50 to 60,000, which was nearly the brink of extinction. Condolences, Xiang Beifei said. Taoist Qingde sighed deeply, then turned around with a solemn face and knelt on one knee before Xiang Beifei. On behalf of all the surviving members of Hanxia, I thank you, young brother, for your life-saving grace. Ah! Xiang Beifei was startled and reflexively turned and fell from the rooftop, landing with a plop onto the broken tiles below. Taoist Qingde was slightly taken aback. Don't do this, grandfather. No, elder. I mean senior. Xiang Beifei climbed out of the broken tiles, brushed the debris off his head, and felt a wave of unease. That was his grandfather, after all. If he accepted the gratitude, it might shorten his own life. But Taoist Qingde was clear that it was Xiang Beifei who had eliminated all the meat-winged monsters and ghostly visage in the floating immortal isles. If it had not been for Xiang Beifei's help in shielding the people below, Taoist Qingde wouldn't have dared to let loose in battle against so many heavenly connection realm masters from the Yi tribe. There were far too many things for him to worry about. Protecting the safety of the human race was his duty, and this was also the reason for Hanxia human race's defeat. If they could fight freely, not to mention the heavenly connection realm, even a full-strength strike from the god refining stage could level a 10-mile radius, which ordinary people could not withstand. If they had fought these Yi tribe members outside of Hanxia's land, the human race would not have been so distressed. But every cultivator took it upon themselves to protect the people of Hanxia. They all understood their mission and responsibility. In populated areas, they could only defend passively. It was also thanks to Xiang Beifei's assistance just now that they could go all out in exterminating the enemy. In Taoist Qingde's eyes, although Xiang Beifei's cultivation was only in the late stage of orifice transforming, the abilities he displayed were extremely special. He could even accurately channel his overflowing sword qi to attack others, his lone efforts nearly ensuring that Hanxia's last bastion did not fall. Otherwise, by the end, there might not just be 50 to 60,000 people left. Total annihilation was a possibility. This act of gratitude, from Taoist Qingde's perspective, was fully appropriate. Senior, please refrain from such formalities. We are still not out of danger. Xiang Beifei sat back on the stone and spoke earnestly. Taoist Qingde found the young man's reaction puzzling, but after a brief contemplation, he no longer persisted. Instead, he landed beside Xiang Beifei and said, "Understood. I haven't asked for the young brother's name yet." "A nobody. There should be a name to call you by. My surname is Xiang. The Xiang as in looking at one's back. Xiang Nangue." Xiang Beifei casually brushed it off. Taoist Qingde looked at Xiang Beifei, and for some reason, he found that the more he looked at Xiang Beifei, the weirder it seemed, saying, "Why do I always feel like I've seen you somewhere before, young brother?" Well, wouldn't he look familiar as someone carved from the same mold over 3 generations? Xiang Beifei forced a dry laugh and said, "Maybe it's because I inadvertently passed by this place a few days ago and was wanted as what you call an inner spy." Only then did Taoist Qingde recall the commotion from the inner spy incident a few days ago. His brows furrowed with heaviness. "Then how did you manage to enter our Hanxia? You might not believe it, but I was walking in the desolate lands, heard some strange bell sounds, walked this way, and somehow ended up here," Xiang Beifei said, touching his forehead. Taoist Qingde took another pause. His eyes seemed to flicker with a strange light, as if he was pondering something. After a long while, Taoist Qingde suddenly said, "You are a Taoist body." "What's a Taoist body?" Xiang Beifei asked, puzzled. "You don't know?" Taoist Qingde stared intently at Xiang Beifei, as if trying to discern whether he was pretending or not. But Xiang Beifei genuinely did not understand. "Am I supposed to know?" he asked. "You don't know. You actually don't know." Taoist Qingde was extremely surprised. Seeing that Xiang Beifei's reactions did not seem fake, he then asked, "Then, do you understand what a Tao embryo is?" "What is it?" Xiang Beifei suddenly became spirited and asked curiously, "Just now, I heard the meat-winged monster and the demon tentacle shouting at you to hand over the Tao embryo. Were they targeting you because of this Tao embryo thing? The human race is a race favored by the heavenly Tao," Taoist Qingde said solemnly. "And so, we have gained the recognition of the heavenly Tao, and thus we possess Tao embryos, becoming cultivators. You are also a cultivator of the human race. How do you not know about this?" Taoist Qingde retorted. "No one has ever mentioned it to me." Xiang Beifei shrugged. "Then how do you cultivate?" "That's a good question." Reflecting back on the first time he began cultivating, because he accepted the rules of the Zhuzhou world right from the start, everything seemed to fall into place naturally. He hadn't paid any attention to how cultivation was actually achieved. "I don't know. Everyone else was cultivating, so I just followed suit," Xiang Beifei said. "Protecting the Tao embryo means safeguarding the hope for the continuation of our human race," Taoist Qingde stated. "What does the Tao embryo look like, then?" Xiang Beifei asked again. Taoist Qingde mused over Xiang Beifei's words and fell silent, not answering immediately. This was a secret of the human race. It wasn't wise to casually disclose it to a stranger. But at that moment, a violent booming sound came from afar once more, and the 8 floating immortal isles started to tremble again. The terrifying and powerful spiritual power fluctuations roared over like a ferocious tempest, battering the formation of the floating immortal isles. The battle within the isle had concluded, yet outside the floating immortal isles, Taoist Qingyang and 2 demon gods were still clashing. Their powers were that of the mighty immortal realm. As spiritual power interwove, the aftershocks rocked the very fabric of space, almost tearing it apart. Taoist Qingde's expression changed as well, anxiously looking toward the battlefield outside the isle. There, various intense spiritual powers tore through space. Netherworld water and red tendrils intertwined in an inextricable battle with Taoist Qingyang. It was a tremendously terrifying battle. To avoid affecting those nearby, Taoist Qingyang purposely drew the battlefield 10 miles away, yet the leftover tremors from the fight still made the vicinity rumble ominously. "Taoist Qingyang, you're no match for the 2 of us. Do you still wish to resist stubbornly?" The Eternal Night Sovereign sneered coldly. "Hand over the Tao embryo, and I will leave you with an intact corpse." the demon tentacle king burst forth with trails of blood light, hammering towards Taoist Qingyang. Taoist Qingyang, with sword qi crisscrossing in his hands, blocked these attacks. The Tao embryo must still be on the floating immortal isles. Let's break through their defenses first. Eternal Night Sovereign and the Demon Tentacle King exchanged a look, and the light around them both intensified. Their furious aura seemed as if they were about to punch a hole in the heavens and earth. Space twisted violently, and the vortexes formed by the netherworld water roared angrily. Each vortex resembled a deep abyssal hole, emitting a terrifying low chant. Even Xiaohe could not approach successfully due to such a horrifying aura. The Eternal Night Sovereign and the Demon Tentacle King noticed the situation on the floating Immortal Isles. All their minions were blocked outside the floating Immortal Isles. They then directed their assault on the floating Immortal Isles, with red vortexes mixed with black tentacles, stirring up beams of gray light, rushing towards the floating Immortal Isles. However, Taoist Qingyang turned into a fleeting shadow, appearing in front of the floating Immortal Isles. Roaring with ferocious sword qi in his hands, he drew down the lightning from the sky. Magnificent divine lightning cracked with the sword qi, aiming at the beams of gray light. Boom! Boom! Blasts set off terrifying ripples, sweeping out in circles and pushing Taoist Qingyang back hundreds of meters. He slapped the void behind him with his left hand, materializing a pattern of the 8 trigrams array on his palm. As if leaning against a wall, he forcefully stopped his own body with this 8 trigrams pattern. "Senior brother," Taoist Qingda called out softly. Taoist Qingyang wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, his gaze filled with sorrow as he looked at the once prosperous Hanxia kingdom, now turned into a wasteland, his heart filled with pain. "Don't worry about me, Qingda. Make sure everyone is safe when you leave." Taoist Qingyang clenched his fists. "Senior brother, let's go together." Taoist Qingda shouted lowly. "I must hold them back." Taoist Qingyang's entire being floated mid-air, a golden light shining from his body, resembling a dazzling sun, illuminating every person on the floating Immortal Isles. His eyes gradually firmed, and his body burst forth with a resolve to face death. Boom! His light swept out, clearing away the meat-winged monsters and ghost mustache of remnant visage that were still attacking the floating Immortal Isles, not allowing any of the E-tribe to approach the floating Immortal Isles. But he couldn't help spitting out another mouthful of blood. "Senior brother, sect leader." Everyone on the floating Immortal Isles looked at Taoist Qingyang with eyes full of worry. As long as there is one person alive, there is hope. He stood with his back to everyone, alone and slender but so resolute, like a mountain, protecting everyone from danger. Xiang Beifei also clenched his fists, his face heavy as he looked at Taoist Qingyang. The scale of the battle was beyond his ability. It was not something he could intervene in, and even Xiaohe could not approach the battle region. Netherworld soul ferrying chant. On the other side, the Eternal Night Sovereign roared, and the netherworld water around him became even more turbulent. Shrill screams emanated from each netherworld vortex, countless pale lights converging from the netherworld, appearing ahead. These pale lights formed shadows in the air. Those were the souls of the dead, not just humans but also various desolate beasts. Different people saw different souls. Anyone who personally witnessed their deaths would see them appear. What Taoist Qingyang saw were innumerable souls of desolate beasts and the spirits of the humans who had just perished. These souls abruptly manifested in front of his eyes, faces filled with terror or helplessly looking at him. "Sect leader, why didn't you save me? I was devoured by a netherworld monster. You cultivators promised to protect us. You purposely let us die." All the souls were speaking to Taoist Qingyang, their different voices lingering in his ears for a long time, influencing his mind. Even when he closed his eyes, he could still see them. "I cannot protect you, but I can protect those who remain." Taoist Qingyang took a deep breath, his will firm. However, those souls rushed towards him. Screams, calls, and wails, countless sound waves formed a powerful attack in the air, among which were numerous red tentacles intertwining. 9 Nether Shatter Space. The Demon Tentacle King's red tentacles sealed off the space completely. Wherever the red tentacles reached, space seemed to be obliterated, shattered into pieces, with even spiritual power being directly annihilated. Beneath Taoist Qingyang's feet, golden light brightened, forming 8 trigrams patterns. At that moment, a stone gate rose rumblingly from the ground in the center of the 8 floating immortal isles, with a Tao stone hanging on it. He stood above the Tao stone, his clothes moving without wind, standing there as if he was the very heavens. Row upon row of golden formations spread out from under Taoist Qingyang's feet, wrapping around the stone bell, which was covered with layers of golden patterns. Dong! Dong! The stone bell suddenly rang out with a distant chant, as if ancient deities were calling out. Every chime that emanated stirred up a peculiar fluctuation that fell upon the 8 floating immortal isles. Wrapped in formations, the 8 isles began to slowly rotate around the stone bell under the drive of the formations. They arranged themselves tightly in the pattern of the 8 trigrams array, rotating faster and faster. Taoist Qingyang's powerful spiritual power seemed to become the source that drove this formation. Xiang Beifei had already felt it. This was a grand teleportation array attached to the peripheries of the floating immortal isles that could transport the people on the isles away. But with nearly 60,000 people spread across the 8 floating immortal isles, even Taoist Qingyang of the immortal realm would be heavily burdened to teleport so many at once, not to mention the 2 demon gods on the outside, neither of whom was any less powerful than he. I never agreed to let you leave. The Eternal Night Sovereign and the Demon Tentacle King launched their full power towards the floating immortal isles again, trying to stop Taoist Qingyang. Their terrifying spiritual power suddenly bombarded the outskirts of the 8 isles. Spurt! Unable to hold back, Taoist Qingyang spewed out a mouthful of fresh blood, his face instantly turning as white as paper. The stone bell constantly drew on Taoist Qingyang's strength to maintain the operation of the formation. He had no extra strength to counterattack the Eternal Night Sovereign and the Demon Tentacle King, and could only forcibly resist using his own spiritual power, yet he was further wounded. Brother! Taoist Qingda clenched his fist tightly and watched Taoist Qingyang in agony. He wanted to help, but having not broken through to the immortal realm, he had no means to intervene in such a battle. Survive! Even with severe injuries, Taoist Qingyang did not fall. His figure stayed erect, like a monument standing in mid-air. He fearlessly struck towards the stone bell with his palm. Powerful formations swiftly spread and landed in every corner of the isles. The formations on the isles also unleashed rows of golden patterns, like silk threads, connecting every person on the isles together. The source of these golden threads all converged in Taoist Qingda's hands. Red-eyed, he looked at his senior brother but said nothing further, gathering all the formations together instead. The isles spun faster and faster, blurring to the point of obscurity, yet the figure of Taoist Qingyang remained sharply etched in the eyes of everyone. Every person of Hanxia clenched their hearts as they watched their sect leader endure the bombardments from the 2 demon gods time and again, yet still gritting his teeth to hold on, opening a path of escape for the human race of Hanxia. That resolute figure was deeply engraved in their minds. Their hearts bled. Many cried out in grief, unable to hold back their tears. They wanted to help Taoist Qingyang, but didn't know where to begin. Xiang Beifei remained silent, yet his heart was greatly shaken. He knew what Taoist Qingyang's fate would be. For the people of Hanxia, Taoist Qingyang stayed behind alone to cover their retreat, becoming the last man standing on the floating immortal isles, turned into a skeleton. Xiang Beifei clenched his fists, but like everyone else, he could do nothing and could only silently watch everything unfold. Go! Taoist Qingda saw that Xiang Beifei on the side had not been connected by the formations and waved his hand, sweeping Xiang Beifei up as well. However, the formation did not connect to Xiang Beifei and peeled off like a phantom. Xiang Beifei was stunned for a moment. Whoosh! 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 All the surviving human race on the floating immortal isles were sent away by the powerful teleportation array. Vanishing from the isles, Taoist Qingda was somewhat surprised in the last moment. He had intended to take Xiang Beifei with him, but was unsuccessful. Everyone left, leaving only Xiang Beifei on the floating Immortal Isles, as well as Taoist Qingyang in the sky maintaining the formation. Taoist Qingyang, noticing that Xiang Beifei was the only one left, looked surprised. He had no time to tend to Xiang Beifei, though, as the Eternal Night Sovereign and the Demon Tentacle King were still in the skies. The speed of the rotation of the 8 floating Immortal Isles slowed down. He stopped maintaining the formation and just looked up coldly at the two. "They have left, now you too shall stay." Taoist Qingyang declared so. Boom! A fierce sword chi surged into the sky. His entire body was burning with golden flames, which, fueled by Taoist Qingyang's spiritual power, instantly ignited the waters of the underworld in the area. The once morbidly cold waters of the underworld blazed with yellow fire, as if oil had been set aflame. What? The Eternal Night Sovereign was taken aback. He never expected the Taoist Qingyang, whom he and the Demon Tentacle King had been suppressing, to suddenly become so fierce. Those were his strange and powerful waters of the underworld, which were dreadfully sinister, always devouring everything. It never occurred to him that they could be ignited. Yet the flames on Taoist Qingyang's body were like the fiercest fire in the world, and his aura suddenly became 10 times more vigorous than before. Was he holding back all this while? The Demon Tentacle King exclaimed in shock. At that moment, Taoist Qingyang's strength seemed to skyrocket, far exceeding their imaginations. The world-destroying golden flames seemed to set the sky ablaze, turning everything a shade of gold. Those meat-winged monsters and ghost whiskers of remnant visage that had still been standing in the air were all staring at everything with horrified faces. "Burning Yang!" Taoist Qingyang coldly exclaimed. Whoosh! 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 Aside from the Eternal Night Sovereign and the Demon Tentacle King, all the meat-winged monsters and ghost whiskers of remnant visage suddenly burst into flames. They struggled in the air, screaming, trying to escape the intensely masculine, golden flames, but to no avail. The flames burned from within them. Not only these from the E-tribe, but everything within 10,000 zhang of Taoist Qingyang as the center started burning. Stones, plants, buildings, the entire heaven and earth were enveloped in flames, transforming the world into a fiery hell, refining these invaders. So powerful! Xiang Beifei felt as if the blood in his body was also boiling, as though it was about to uncontrollably ignite, but he swiftly circulated the chaos yin-yang formula, maintaining his spiritual power in a balanced state, resisting the urge to burn. Taoist Qingyang's power exceeded all expectations of the E-tribe. Ah! Sharp screams echoed all around as the meat-winged monsters and ghost whiskers of remnant visage were burned to ashes, burned to nothingness. The originally vast lands of Hansha were annihilated. All houses and buildings turned to fly ash, turning it all into a desert. Xiang Beifei had now understood why Taoist Qingyang had not gone all out before, because he was concerned about all of the human race, wanting to protect all humans, and hence he had to suppress his own power. Otherwise, in this terrifying inferno, not a single member of the human race would have survived. But after sending all members of the human race away, Taoist Qingyang no longer had any concerns, and in a fury, Burning Yang decimated the E-tribe. The Eternal Night Sovereign and the Demon Tentacle King were also stunned by the terrifying flames of the ultimate Yang. Fear appeared in their eyes as they desperately resisted the flames in the air. But Burning Yang could ignite not just the outside, but cause them to burn from the inside out. The two demon kings also cried out in agony. They struggled within the flames, all their tentacles burning and unable to escape the terrifying inferno. Gradually, the two immortals of the immortal realm were directly burned to nothingness. Within 10,000 zhang, flames pervaded everywhere, burning continuously for an hour. Apart from the 8 floating immortal isles, everything was burned to exhaustion, and only 2 people remained standing there. One was Taoist Qingyang, the other was Xiang Beifei. "It's you!" Taoist Qingyang's gaze fell on Xiang Beifei, recognizing the aura with which Xiang Beifei had fought 2 days earlier, although he had not captured him, but he recognized this aura. Seeing only Xiang Beifei standing, murder appeared in Taoist Qingyang's eyes. "Did you lead the E-tribe here?" Taoist Qingyang demanded coldly. Xiang Beifei was slightly startled. 2 days earlier, he had inadvertently entered the floating immortal isles, and then the meat-winged monsters and ghost whiskers of remnant visage had come too, naturally making him a suspect. No! Xiang Beifei shook his head. Taoist Qingyang stared intently at Xiang Beifei. Then after a long while he sighed lightly. That's good. The murderous intent in his eyes dissipated, and his whole demeanor seemed to relax, walking slowly back to a ruin on the floating immortal isles and sitting on a piece of rubble. Xiang Beifei then remembered something. This ruin was exactly where he first met Taoist Qingyang. But he found it odd that Taoist Qingyang, who had just been bristling with killing intent, would believe him just because of his word. Senior is injured, Xiang Beifei said. It's nothing. Taoist Qingyang's forehead was sweaty, and the blood trickled down his face, covering his pale countenance. It might be an illusion, but it seems like Senior's body is out of balance, Xiang Beifei said. After a moment of silence, Taoist Qingyang slowly said, Burning yang, which burns the yang energy of the world, though powerful, also requires one's own yang energy as fuel. This is not good. Xiang Beifei's black and white spiritual power complemented each other, maintaining a balanced state. He was very clear about the consequences of a yin and yang imbalance. Taoist Qingyang looked up at Xiang Beifei and said, You were able to resist the flames of burning yang. It appears you might be a Taoist body. Xiang Beifei frowned and said, This is the second time today someone has said this to me. You didn't know? I didn't. Xiang Beifei shook his head. Taoist Qingyang's gaze had a peculiar glint. Before you came here, you must have already seen me in this state, hadn't you? How did Senior know? Xiang Beifei was quite surprised. Because you are not from this era? Taoist Qingyang looked at Xiang Beifei. I can tell. Xiang Beifei was stunned. I thought this was an illusion, he said. This is not an illusion. To me, you have come from the future. To you, you have returned to my era. Taoist Qingyang explained. I've returned to the past? Xiang Beifei was very astonished. Yet he had no signs of it and did not understand why he had returned to the past. I don't remember how I managed it, he said. Taoist Qingyang pondered for a moment, saying, You must have heard the ringing of the bell, seen my deceased self, and then touched the stone ring in my hand. If you are from the past, how could you know of future events? Xiang Beifei asked. Taoist Qingyang raised his head, looking towards the sky that was still smoldering hot from the burning yang. The sky still a fiery red, the clouds seeming to burn still, trailing flames, making the sky appear somewhat distorted. He sighed, then lowered his head, caressing the stone ring in his hand, saying, Because only a special person can trigger the Taoist ring and come here. The stone ring was plain and unadorned, without any shine, nor any aura emanating from it. Xiang Beifei frowned. He indeed had touched that stone ring. Ordinary people who touch the stone ring can only see what happened in the past, but cannot intervene. But when you touch the stone ring, not only could you see what happened in the past, but you could also intervene in it, Taoist Qingyang remarked. Is it because of the Taoist body? Xiang Beifei inquired. Yes. Taoist Qingyang nodded. The Taoist body is a very peculiar cultivation physique. No matter what it encounters, it always maintains the most primitive balance. That's why you weren't ignited by the burning yang. The Taoist body cultivates very rapidly. Others cultivate a single path, but he is naturally able to intervene and control all the paths. Xiang Beifei thought carefully about this statement and suddenly thought of something, his eyes widening in amazement. Then how many years apart are you and I? He asked eagerly. Taoist Qingyang's gaze flashed with a flame, and Xiang Beifei's figure in his eyes seemed to be burning. By your reckoning, it's over 3,000 years ago. Thousands of miles away in a secluded mountain range, countless people appeared here. If Xiang Beifei was here, he would definitely recognize it. This is the Siho mountain range. However, the Siho at this time was completely different from the Siho that Xiang Beifei visited. The hills were lush, yet some volcanoes were smoking. Taoist Qingda forcibly created a canyon with his mighty spiritual power. the atmosphere shook, and all the desolate beasts around panicked and fled, allowing the Hansha human race to temporarily settle in the canyon. Everyone was very tired. Hansha could no longer be returned to, and they didn't know where to go next. Taoist Qingda commanded the crowd, asking cultivators to protect the common people, assigning some of the lightly injured to be on guard, and then take turns on watch. Once everything was confirmed, he sat down to tend to his own injuries. Taoist Qingda, that young man called Xiang Nangui, he didn't get teleported here, said an elder of the heavenly connection. Taoist Qingda was silent for a long while, saying, "He cannot leave the range of the stone ring." "Why?" the elder asked, puzzled. Taoist Qingda hesitated to speak. After a long pause, he said, "He is different from us. That fellow Taoist Xiang Nangui. He probably isn't called Xiang Nangui." Taoist Qingda remembered the young man who looked very familiar, recalling some of the young man's strange actions. He couldn't help but wave out a water mirror, looking at himself through the mirror and reminiscing about the young man's appearance. Grandfather, great-grandfather, senior. Taoist Qingda remembered that when he had gratefully bowed to the young man, the youngster had panicked and tumbled down and suddenly realized something. Gradually, his gaze turned into astonishment. The elder spoke again. "Since we can't return to Hansha, where should we go to establish a new home?" "To the south," Taoist Qingda stated firmly. "The south? Why the south?" the elder puzzled. "Because he went all the way north," Taoist Qingda replied. The flames gradually extinguished, and the yang energy of this land was all burned away, turning it into a place with extremely heavy yin energy. Taoist Qingyang leaned wearily against the stone wall, his wounds still bleeding. "You said you're from Zhouzhou?" "Yes," Xiang Beifei said. "That place, how should I say it? It's very different from Hansha." Taoist Qingyang nodded slightly and, after a long pause, started coughing violently, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. "I can try to help you, senior." Xiang Beifei's hands gathered the aura of return to the original state. "No need." Taoist Qingyang wiped the blood from his mouth and smiled. "The way you came here, you should understand what my end is to be." He understood what his destiny was and had chosen to accept it. "But Senior once said that I could change the past." Xiang Beifei still insisted and quickly approached, the aura of return to the original state in his hands soon touching Taoist Qingyang. Quickly, however, he furrowed his brow. "Burning yang, burning away the yang energy, yin and yang out of balance, it's not something that can be easily restored." Taoist Qingyang shook his head. "Unless there is an utmost yang item to replenish the yang energy that I've burned, but that's essentially impossible." Xiang Beifei didn't give up and asked again, "What if I come back again? If I time travel from the future back here once more, maybe I can give an early warning, and Senior would not have to use the burning yang." Hansha was invaded surreptitiously. The human race was caught off guard and nearly annihilated. If only Xiang Beifei returned to 2 days prior, and during the encounter with those people, didn't resist and made everything clear to Taoist Qingyang, perhaps they wouldn't end up so tragically. Taoist Qingyang shook his head. "In fact, humanity was already extinct, and it's only because of your intervention that they had the chance to escape. The Zhouzhou that you came from is likely the continuation of our Hansha." He squeezed out a smile as if relieved. "The human race is still alive, and that's enough for me. I die without regrets." Xiang Beifei was stunned. "But the cultivation system in Zhouzhou is completely different from that in Hansha." Xiang Beifei said. "Hansha was more like the ancient Taoist practitioners, but in Zhouzhou everyone has their own system." "It's the same. I can feel it from within you," Taoist Qingyang said. The more Xiang Beifei thought about it, the more inconceivable it seemed. If that were the case, he vaguely understood how Zhouzhou had developed. Taoist Qingda, his grandfather, must have led the last of humanity to that land to establish Zhouzhou, developing it to its present state. Is this the origin of Zhouzhou? In the textbooks of Zhouzhou, there is no mention of how Zhouzhou developed. It just appeared as if it was meant to be, but Hansha's story was never mentioned. I don't understand if humanity was already extinct in the past. How did I come to exist in the future? It was a complete paradox. If humanity was extinct in the past, it would mean that Jojo did not exist. He couldn't have been born in Jojo, couldn't have followed the direction pointed by the Mound Spirit, couldn't have walked northward until he heard the stone bell, come to the floating immortal isles, and gone to rescue the 50 to 60,000 people of Hanxia, and he certainly couldn't have intervened in humanity's extinction. Taoist Qingyang looked at Xiang Beifei, his gaze flickering briefly, and said, "Something must have happened to you that doesn't happen to ordinary people, and it's been troubling you." Not ordinary. He could control everyone's systems, capture any cultivator with a system, and beat them senseless, and that had always been what set him apart. But was it just that? Xiang Beifei felt it wasn't what Taoist Qingyang was referring to. Soon, he suddenly realized, looking astonished at Taoist Qingyang. He understood what set him apart from everyone else. "You've realized it, haven't you?" Taoist Qingyang said with a strained smile. "Perhaps you have always questioned your existence in this world, asking yourself if you truly belong to this world. I can only guess, but I think you must have such doubts." Xiang Beifei looked astounded. Taoist Qingyang had hit the mark perfectly. "Is this why I have two sets of memories?" Xiang Beifei asked. He had always believed that he had crossed over from another world, occupying the body of another youth called Xiang Beifei in this world, inheriting his identity and memories, and replacing that person's life. Therefore, he was unable to fully regard Xiang Tianqing's parents, whom he had never met, as his own. At most, he could only consider his caretaker, Xiang Qingde, as his true grandfather, and he protected this amnesiac old man. But at Siho, his grandfather had assured him unequivocally that both versions of him were him, the real Xiang Beifei. This had always troubled him. "You have two sets of memories?" Taoist Qingyang asked. "My early life and later life are different." Xiang Beifei pondered how to find the right words to explain. "It's like living in two worlds, then being forcefully merged into one. I thought I had traversed from another world. I understand now." Taoist Qingyang nodded slightly. "But I don't understand," Xiang Beifei said. "You and junior brother Qingde look very similar. What is your relationship with him?" Taoist Qingyang asked. Xiang Beifei hesitated for a moment and said, "He seems like my grandfather, perhaps. I can't be completely certain. I have never seen him when he was young. I can only guess based on the likeness and that woofing sword." He drew his hand skyward. Ripples appeared in the air, and he pulled the broken woofing sword from the void. Taoist Qingyang looked at the woofing sword, nodded slightly. "That's it then, junior brother Qingde indeed is your grandfather. You must have his bloodline to be able to wield this woofing." He looked at Xiang Beifei with much gentler eyes. "What is your name?" Taoist Qingde was his junior brother, and in a way he was also Xiang Beifei's grandmaster. Xiang Beifei. Xiang Beifei wrote his name in midair. "That's an interesting name," Taoist Qingyang smiled. Then Taoist Qingde, "What did grandfather do to me?" Xiang Beifei asked. "He didn't tell you?" "He had an accident, I don't know why. Though he had already stepped into the immortal realm, he still lost his memory," Xiang Beifei said. "Memory loss?" Taoist Qingyang furrowed his brows, appearing to ponder the beginning and end of the matter, then shook his head and said, "I do not know of future events. I can only speculate that some existence in the Edge Corner airspace helped Taoist Qingde, allowing you to intervene in this world in a special way, preserving the human race. This led to the paradoxical result where the human race was already extinct, unable to continue, yet there is your existence, returning to the past to prolong the human race." But Xiang Beifei still could not understand the process. Taoist Qingyang shifted his gaze toward the north, his eyes clouded with a mist, murmuring. He probably still hoped that the human race would continue. "Who is he?" Xiang Beifei asked. Taoist Qingyang started coughing violently. His complexion grew paler, the vitality in his body gradually fading away, enveloped by a layer of yin energy, a consequence of burning yang. "He is an existence we all look up to." The yin energy around him grew heavier, and his voice weakened further. Xiang Beifei's expression became solemn. Taoist Qingyang, being a cultivator of the immortal realm, possessed terrifying strength. What kind of existence could it be that even such a person looked up to? Regaining his composure, Taoist Qingyang asked, "Why is your cultivation only at the late stage of orifice transforming? I have only been cultivating for less than 3 years. But your strength shouldn't be limited to this." Taoist Qingyang shook his head. "I don't know how to step into the heavenly connection. Grandfather once told me that heavenly connection is meeting heaven and earth, to comprehend the laws between heaven and earth, to find one's own path, but I can't understand it," Xiang Beifei said. "You don't need to comprehend the Tao," Taoist Qingyang spoke. "But grandfather said, haven't you wondered what a Tao embryo is?" Taoist Qingyang said calmly. Xiang Beifei hesitated. He indeed had a vague guess in his heart. Is it the system that every person from Zhuozhou has? That was the only explanation. If Zhuozhou is the continuation of the Hanxia human race, then the Tao embryo that Taoist Qingde took must act on humans in a very special way. I don't know what this system you speak of is. Perhaps the junior brother modified the Tao embryo, letting the Tao embryo exist in another way, allowing everyone to possess a Tao embryo, giving everyone the ability to protect themselves. However, I can be fairly certain of one thing. You can intervene in everyone's system. Can you? Taoist Qingyang spoke. Xiang Beifei's eyes brightened. Yes. He didn't deny it. That's it then? Taoist Qingyang coughed again, his chest heaving continuously, and said, "A Taoist body can control all Tao embryos, so you don't need to comprehend the Tao." Taoist Qingyang coughed violently again, coughing for a long time before slowly saying, "Because you yourself are the Tao." Xiang Beifei was slightly taken aback. "You will understand." Taoist Qingyang looked at Xiang Beifei kindly, as if looking at his own child. His eyes filled with satisfaction and gratitude, yet his aura was nearly that of a lamp running out of oil. "Where does the Tao embryo come from?" Xiang Beifei asked. "It comes from Edge Corner airspace. The human race is a race favored by the heavens, which gave us the capital to cultivate, but it has also aroused the envy of the E-tribe. The human race is declining, having had most of their Tao embryos taken away by them, transforming the Tao embryos into their own power." Taoist Qingyang looked at the ruins before him and said, "You will find that many races try hard to resemble humans, because the human body structure is the most suitable among all for cultivation. The moon god race originally didn't look human, but they can disguise themselves as humans because they use the netherworld water to devour humans, relying on the human body to cultivate. The same goes for the demon tentacle race. Today, countless humans are being killed, countless Tao embryos taken away. Even if I were to kill all the people, I could not reclaim the Tao embryos. Those Tao embryos have all been sacrificed to the netherworld river, and they will still return." Taoist Qingyang looked at Xiang Beifei and said, "But you can control all Tao embryos, including those of the E-tribe. Once you enter heavenly connection, you will understand how to deal with those E-tribes, just like managing those systems. Make good use of this ability." Taoist Qingyang was coughing, and he had completely lost his complexion. "I can't hold on any longer. I've sealed the last bit of my life force in a stone ring, always waiting for your arrival. Be careful, I killed the Demon King, but the Eternal Night Demon King has made a pact with the Netherworld. Even if it's severely weakened, it will be resurrected and target Zhuozhou again to seize the Tao embryos of the human race. To completely kill the Eternal Night Demon King, the Netherworld must be destroyed." The voice of Taoist Qingyang grew weaker and weaker, and the scenery around began to shake. He strained to point his finger. A ray of light flowed from his fingertip towards Xiang Beifei, entering his mind. "Child, these are Burning Yang and Burning Yin, two completely different cultivation techniques. I am not a Taoist body. Fully unleashing either Burning Yang or Burning Yin will backfire on me, but you are different. How you should cultivate, you will have to explore it yourself. You are the grandchild of Taoist Qingde and my junior. Consider this a meeting gift from me, and thank you for saving mankind. If possible, please take my remains to the place where you grew up, to see it one last time. Senior, I will bring you back to Zhuozhou," Xiang Beifei said. Thank you. The voice of Taoist Qingyang gradually faded away, followed by everything around him aging rapidly, and various strange lights flowed like shooting stars, the sky changing continuously, numerous shadows wandering around. By the time Xiang Beifei regained his senses, he was still standing on the floating immortal isles. But differently, there were two pale moons hanging in the sky. He had returned from the past, back in the wilderness outside the domain, back to the desert after more than 3,000 years. Xiang Beifei silently looked at the skeletal remains of Taoist Qingyang, a wave of sorrow suddenly emerging in his heart. Taoist Qingyang said Xiang Beifei was key to the continuation of the human race. But Xiang Beifei knew well that it was Taoist Qingyang who had single-handedly saved the entire Hanxia human race from calamity. To preserve the hope of the human race, he stayed behind alone, transported all the humans away, unleashed burning yang, annihilated all enemies, and made it impossible for the Yi tribe to pursue, yet exhausted his last ounce of life. Xiang Beifei looked at the skeleton, then knelt down after a moment and performed a junior's bow to Taoist Qingyang. In any case, Taoist Qingyang deserved this bow. Inside the stone ring was a faint flame, flickering like a dying candle, almost about to go out. It was the life force of Taoist Qingyang, now nearing its end. Xiang Beifei couldn't help but extend a hand and attach his own spiritual power to it, in an attempt to guide that flickering flame from Taoist Qingyang. Then he took out the stone tower from the Wei constellation. Each layer of this tower pulsated with flames. Although he hadn't entirely figured out the tower, he realized it had its special properties that could ensure the flame's longevity. He decided to store the remaining life force of Taoist Qingyang back in the tower to see if it could protect this weak flame. Unable to save Taoist Qingyang, he could only hope that Taoist Qingyang's life force could continue burning in a special way. This time, when he touched the stone ring embedded in Taoist Qingyang's skeleton again, the ring didn't react. He wasn't transported to the past again. Taoist Qingyang had been maintaining the last bit of energy on this stone ring, and as the life force disappeared, the power of the ring also exhausted. Xiang Beifei removed the stone ring, looking at this jade-white skeleton, and carefully collected it. He would take Taoist Qingyang's remains back to Juzhou, bury Taoist Qingyang at the highest place in Juzhou, letting him see how the civilization of Hanxia continued in Juzhou, as a comfort to him in his old age. The stone bell continued to resonate non-stop, its sound deep and heavy. The 8 floating immortal isles hovered in mid-air, and in the darkness of the night, they looked like 8 ghostly islands, quite eerie. Xiang Beifei sat cross-legged on top of the stone bell, reflecting on Taoist Qingyang's words. Am I the Tao? He pondered this sentence carefully. It made him very confused. His grandfather had said that this world possesses various laws, and he needed to comprehend these Taos to step into the heavenly connection realm. Yet Taoist Qingyang had claimed that Xiang Beifei did not need to comprehend the Tao, for he himself was the Tao. The statements of these two seemed somewhat conflicting. If one said the Tao embryo was the system, then indeed Xiang Beifei could control all systems, but why would the system be referred to as the Tao embryo? Xiang Beifei meditated on this, pondering the various systems he had encountered, recalling the features of each system, and gradually he began to realize something. I understand now the rules of the system, the laws of the heavenly Tao, that's what it means. Xiang Beifei's eyes lit up. His grandfather's and Taoist Qingyang statements were not in conflict after all. As the progenitor of systems, he was all too familiar with the various features of systems. All people on the Juzhou continent were referred to as cultivators, and cultivators were divided into those of the literary Tao and the martial Tao. The so-called cultivation was the practice of the heavenly Tao laws. The great Tao is boundless, choose one and follow it. The cultivation paths in this world were innumerable, and the moment one awakened a system, one decided which one of those paths to take. Each system had its own operative rules, and no matter what the level or talent of the system, the host had to follow the system's rules if they wanted to become stronger. If the system was the Tao embryo, then the ability of a system was the derivation of a heavenly Tao law, and also a path of cultivation in the heavenly Tao. When someone awakened this Tao embryo of a system, they had to follow its path. As long as they followed the system's rules and strived to fulfill the conditions required by those rules, then every system could bring a person to the heavenly connection realm. Because the heavenly connection realm is about connecting with the heavenly Tao laws, and these laws are the system itself. For instance, Elder Luo's leisure system contained a Tao embryo that followed the Tao of leisure, and by engaging in various leisure activities, one could grow stronger. Thus, when this system reached the heavenly connection realm, the heavenly Tao law it connected with was that of leisure. In other words, Elder Luo's cultivation was the Tao of leisure. Yi Chongfeng's supremacy of 10,000 sword system contained a Tao embryo that was of the sword Tao. Anything done in relation to swords equated to an understanding of the sword Tao. When he reached the late stage of orifice transforming and stepped into the heavenly connection realm, the heavenly Tao law he connected with would be that of the sword. The others, like Professor Guo's counterattack system, Li Zimu's literature system, Long Guoqing's spotlight system, even including Chang Furong, who had cultivated all his life and only reached the meridian opening stage with his SSR-grade evil accumulating system, were the same. All systems were heavenly Tao laws, and every system awakener was actually comprehending this path while doing tasks in daily life. Take the leisure system, which Xiang Beifei was most familiar with, for example. Elder Luo spent his days doing mundane chores, from ants moving house, counting ducks, cracking sunflower seeds to taking naps. All of this was him comprehending the heavenly Tao law of leisure. Only by fully grasping the essence of a certain Tao and reaching a certain level, one could connect with the heavenly Tao laws and interface with heaven and earth. This means that Elder Luo should be the person who understands the leisure heavenly Tao the best by now. Therefore, it was not difficult for someone with a system to connect with the heavenly Tao laws and step into the heavenly connection realm. Even if it was an N-grade system, theoretically, it was possible to reach the heavenly connection realm. The connection between the Tao embryo and the heavenly Tao could be strong or weak. The stronger the connection between the Tao embryo within one's body and the heavenly Tao, the faster the growth of the Tao embryo and the easier it would be to attain the Tao. That was the origin of system levels. Xiang Beifei, naturally without a system, could control all systems precisely because he was a Taoist body. Although Taoist Qingyang had not explained in detail what it meant to be a Taoist body, Xiang Beifei could vaguely guess. Everyone had a Tao embryo in them, but as a Taoist body, Xiang Beifei was the culmination of all heavenly Taos, and all paths were viable for him. This was also why he could control all systems. Therefore, he did not need to seek the Tao, for he himself was the Tao. Since I am the Tao, then interfacing with heaven is indeed not difficult. Having realized this, Xiang Beifei suddenly felt enlightened. His grandfather probably arranged for all humans to be settled in Juzhou, then used special methods to transform the ethereal Tao embryos into visual systems, designated symbolic levels like N and S grades, and represented system value with numbers, making cultivation data-driven to be more intuitive and also to help humanity become stronger more quickly. Juzhou was already a place with high modernization. The method of tech cultivation was indeed more effective than the ancient Hanxia. Of course, this system approach had major drawbacks, but at that time, when only 50 to 60,000 of the human race were left, his grandfather wouldn't have considered it deeply, as the best approach was to cultivate a batch of experts first. Closing his eyes and recalling each system, Xiang Beifei had seen countless systems. He was basically familiar with all the different systems throughout Juzhou. If one system was one Tao, then it meant he had seen countless heavenly Taos. In this way, he suddenly understood why he had both black and white spiritual power in him. Tao begets one, one creates two creates three creates all things. One represents the beginning of all things, two represents the chaos in Yang Tu Qi, and three refers to the third party produced by the conflict between Yin and Yang, thus evolving into all things. Therefore, three creates all things, means that Yin and Yang Tu Qi can give birth to countless Tao embryos. Xiang Beifei only has two orifice perceptions of Yin and Yang, black and white, yet he can control all systems because any system is a branch derived from the evolution of Yin and Yang Tu Qi. The so-called Great Way is simple, leading to the same destination by different paths. No matter what the system is, in summary, they are all products of the differentiation of Yin and Yang Tu Qi. All things bear Yin and embrace Yang. His grandfather told him to comprehend the way of black and white, while Taoist Qingyang told him that he is the Tao. What both of them mean is actually exactly the same. Various systems flashed through Xiang Beifei's mind: N-ranked confiscation system, R-ranked Master Dao system, S-ranked Confucian Saint system, SR-ranked Supremacy of 10,000 Sword system, SSR-ranked Shadow Saint system, UR-ranked 10,000 Command system. He operated his chaos yin-yang formula inside his body, maintaining a delicate balance between the black and white spiritual power. After a moment, he focused his attention ahead, where the black and white spiritual power converged into a vortex. A system interface manifested. Dao Master, Xiang Beifei, Dao Level Plant System, Realm, Advanced Stage of Orifice Transforming. Xiang Beifei looked down and saw Yumong, which always hid in his pocket. Whenever he cultivated, Yumong would secretly devour the spiritual power that leaked from him. Today, Yumong was no exception and smiled sheepishly when it saw that Xiang Beifei had caught it in the act. You have cultivated a Yumong. Plant value 3. The system interface displayed these characters. Recently, Yumong had grown quite robust. However, with Era's help, it still preferred to keep its body small for convenience of movement. Xiang Beifei stroked Yumong's head, pondered for a bit, then the black and white spiritual power spun again, and the system interface changed. Dao Master, Xiang Beifei, Dao Level Supremacy of 10,000 Sword system, Realm, Advanced Stage of Orifice Transforming. Xiang Beifei reached out and drew from the air, causing ripples, and the woofing broken sword was pulled out by him. The two-sword chi, black and white, encircled woofing, harmonious and gentle. Xiang Beifei waved the sword in his hand. The yin and yang chi suddenly split at high speed, shooting in different directions. Boom! 2 deep ravine sword marks appeared in the desert, each 1,000 zhang deep. You executed woofing broken sword. Sword chi value 3. What a sword! Xiang Beifei caressed the sword, then looked down at the 2 sword marks he had split. After contemplating for a moment, the black and white spiritual power swept out again. Dao Master, Xiang Beifei, Dao Level Sand Control System, Realm, Advanced Stage of Orifice Transforming. He gave a gentle wave of his hand, and the sand in the desert began to rustle. A sandstorm seemed to blow in the sky. These sandstorms quickly converged together and burrowed into the 2 sword ravines. And in just a moment, the 1,000 zhang deep sword ravines were completely filled, making them appear seamless with the surroundings. Xiang Beifei smiled faintly, and the black and white spiritual power started spinning again. Then his system interface changed once more. Dao Master, Xiang Beifei, Dao Level Leisure System, Realm, Advanced Stage of Orifice Transforming. Xiang Beifei comfortably stretched out on a stone strip atop the stone bell, placing his hands behind his head and laying his right foot over his left knee. Looking at the 2 moons in the sky, he casually said, 1 moon, 2 moons. You counted 2 moons. Leisure value 3. At the same time, he suddenly felt a qualitative change in his spiritual power, as if every sense in his body had been forcefully upgraded a notch, and the system interface in front of him changed yet again. Dao Master, Xiang Beifei, Dao Level Leisure System, Realm, Early Stage of Heavenly Connection. I can finally see my realm. Xiang Beifei couldn't help feeling emotional. In the past, every time he advanced to a new realm, he never knew how to ascertain his cultivation level, always having to ask someone else to confirm it, or having to fight his teacher, Yi Changfeng. Now, relying on the black and white spiritual power, he had simulated a system interface and could finally determine his own realm. Tears in his eyes. Xiang Beifei yawned. You yawned? Leisure value 3. The leisure system is really great, and it's the one Xiang Beifei is most familiar with and his favorite. He always thought the system was incredible, and except for the downside of the system having too few items to showcase, it was basically not weaker than a UR level, especially its powerful ability to reset points was almost unmatched. Xiang Beifei decided to stay with this system for the time being. After all, Elder Luo, the big idler, grew stronger in everything he did, and he wanted to experience that feeling too. System values are like a person's understanding of the heavenly Tao. Completing system tasks is akin to comprehending heavenly Tao laws. But Xiang Beifei was different. As a Taoist body, he was very special. He couldn't quantify his cultivation like other system awakeners. No matter how much Xiang Beifei's cultivation improved, his system value was always 3. Because 3 in the Tao represents infinity. Of course, this didn't prevent him from growing stronger. He used to be a person without a system, and now he had simply simulated a system for fun, not needing to condense back into black and white spiritual power directly. Xiang Beifei could simulate any system he had intervened with his black and white spiritual power, and during his years in Juzhou, he had participated in almost all systems. For many people who set him as the target of their tasks, the system would come under his control. It could be said that by understanding the Tao, he had acquired the abilities of all Tao embryo systems. However, the essence remained the same. No matter what ability Xiang Beifei used, he still relied on his black and white spiritual power. That was the key. But then Xiang Beifei remembered something else. What's the deal with Grandpa's snowflake interface? Xiang Beifei had always been curious about his grandfather's system interface. In Juzhou, where everyone had a system, apart from him, it was only Grandpa who had a white screen. He could only guess the reasons, as Grandpa had connected with the heavenly Tao and reached the late stage of heavenly connection during his time in Hanxia, meaning he didn't need to rely on the system anymore in Juzhou. The system was useless to him. Or maybe, while adapting the Tao embryo, Grandpa turned himself into the first test subject and the adaptation failed? Or was there another reason? Xiang Beifei thought about his grandfather's memory loss. This puzzled Xiang Beifei greatly. After Grandpa led the human race to migrate to Juzhou, his cultivation broke through the heavenly connection realm and reached the immortal realm. His strength was already very powerful. According to his own account, the last time the Eternal Night Demon King tracked him down to Juzhou, preparing to invade, he intercepted and even severely injured the Eternal Night Demon King. But why did he suddenly lose his memory afterward? Was this memory loss related to his Tao embryo? Thinking of the broken Wufeng stone sword, as well as the edge corner airspace mentioned by Yi Ji and Rian, he always felt the answer to this matter lay in the edge corner airspace. Perhaps his parents also went to edge corner airspace. Most importantly, Taoist Qingyang had mentioned that all Tao embryos came from edge corner airspace. This was something Xiang Beifei needed to confirm next. Oh right, there's also Burning Yang and Burning Yin. Xiang Beifei recalled these two cultivation techniques taught by Taoist Qingyang. Taoist Qingyang's wrath that burnt the heavens remained deeply impressive to Xiang Beifei. The Eternal Night Demon King and the Demon Tentacle King, equals in realm, were no match for Taoist Qingyang's Burning Yang. All things in the world are transformed from yin-yang to qi, including people, desolate beasts, plants, rocks, flowing water. Burning Yang is to burn the yang essence of a place. As long as one can clearly perceive yin and yang qi, even the yang essence in the river water can be ignited. If something was originally in a state of balance, but after burning yang, the yang essence is burnt to shuang, leaving behind only yin essence, then yin and yang fall out of balance and death is almost certain. Burning yin is to scorch the yin essence of a place. This has a clever counterpart to burning yang. Burning yang and burning yin were almost tailor-made for Xiang Beifei, for there was no one else in this world who understood the Tao of yin and yang better than him. Without any hesitation, Xiang Beifei immediately began to practice these two powerful cultivation techniques following the method left by Taoist Qingyang. The black and white spiritual power slowly circulated throughout his body, where heaven and earth united to breed all beings, and yin and yang converged to bring about change, with the dual qi intermingling to create all things, everything bearing yin and embracing yang. Xiang Beifei opened his eyes, and they flickered with threads of black and white light. The once vibrant world, in an instant, became solely black and white. This black and white was not like traditional ink wash paintings, with one area indiscriminately black and another white. This black and white melded together, not a trace more of black, not a bit less of white, each occupying half perfectly equal. White for yang, black for yin. Even a tiny grain of sand bore half black and half white on its body, carrying the breath of both paths. Xiang Beifei focused on one grain of sand, channeling the power of Burning Yang, and rapidly burst forth his white spiritual power, which fell upon the grain of sand. To burn Yang, one must first ignite their own Yang Qi, that is, the white spiritual power. Xiang Beifei swiftly ignited his white spiritual power. The moment his white spiritual power lit up, the sand's white spiritual power was also drawn forth, and then with a whoosh, the grain of sand instantly burst into white flames. The previously balanced black and white sand slowly burned away, the sand disintegrating into dust in a moment, with a wisp of Yin Qi added to the air. However, Xiang Beifei quickly realized that igniting his white spiritual power meant that his black spiritual power increased slightly, making it impossible to maintain a precise balance between black and white. But after a brief moment of thought, he immediately began employing Burning Yin. The black spiritual power was also set ablaze, igniting the residual Yin Qi from that grain of sand. The balance of black and white spiritual power was once again maintained. So that's how it is. Xiang Beifei nodded thoughtfully. Burning Yang, predicated on burning one's own spiritual power, proved exceedingly difficult to achieve at the level of Taoist Qingyang. The magnitude of spiritual power needed to burn Yang on a large scale was terrifying. The current him was far from capable of burning a radius of 10,000 li. Furthermore, burning the Yang Qi of an opponent equal in strength was even more challenging, especially for existences of the caliber of the Demon Tentacle King and the Eternal Night Demon King. If only a little was ignited, the opponent could simply sever the ignited part, as the remainder would still maintain balance. Hence, killing an opponent of that level was beyond Xiang Beifei's ability. Even Taoist Qingyang's strength was impressive to have ignited both the Demon Tentacle King and the Eternal Night Demon King. Yet, the downside of burning Yang was starkly apparent. To burn as much of the target's Yang Qi, one must burn an equal amount of their own spiritual power. Even if the Demon Tentacle King and Eternal Night Demon King couldn't match Taoist Qingyang, they weren't far off. After he burned those two Demon Kings, the remaining spiritual power was insufficient for him to employ Burning Yin to balance his body's Yin and Yang. As a result, Qi and Yang fell out of balance, which was why Xiang Beifei couldn't save Taoist Qingyang. Dealing with an opponent of equal strength is indeed a problem. Xiang Beifei was also contemplating whether he could fare better than Taoist Qingyang if he faced the same caliber of opponent. However, he quickly realized that his use of Burning Yang and Burning Yin differed from Taoist Qingyang's, as Taoist Qingyang could not control the black and white spiritual power as freely as he could. For Taoist Qingyang, Burning Yang and Burning Yin could not be executed simultaneously but rather one after the other, meaning if one wanted to use Burning Yang, they must first burn their own Yang Qi, then employ Burning Yin, burning away the excess Yin Qi to maintain balance. This meant facing an opponent of the same realm would require twice the amount of spiritual power. But as a Taoist body, Xiang Beifei could simultaneously master Yin and Yang, employing Burning Yang while immediately using Burning Yin, for he had divided his spiritual power, thus requiring only one expenditure of spiritual power to return to a state of balance. No wonder my esteemed master said I was the most suitable to cultivate these two techniques. Having understood this, his mind became enlightened. Regardless, this was indeed a very formidable ability, and mastering it would only prove beneficial. Xiang Beifei continued his practice, not stopping until he had mastered both Burning Yang and Burning Yin to the point of second nature. What he didn't notice was that, as he cultivated, the frequency of the stone bell's vibrations beneath him seemed to change in tune, with strange fluctuations becoming more resonant and profound, reaching up to the heavens, entering the twin moons suspended in the sky. The dual pale moons suddenly began to grow hazy, and in between them, a black circle appeared, much like a black hole, deep and profound. Immediately after, the moons flickered. Should one look up, the two moons hanging in the sky resembled a pair of eerie eyes, gazing upon this region. Meanwhile, in the depths of a desolate, shadowy land, flowed a strange yellow river, its surface teeming with innumerable sunken skeletons. In an instant, the yellow river violently churned as if whipped into towering waves, and from within the tumult, a withered colossal hand covered in mustard seeds burst forth. "Can't detect it? What is it?" The voice was eerie and shrill, as if formed by the screams of countless people, merging together and rolling outwards. The source of the voice seemed very annoyed, bellowed loudly. and the river waters surged like overturning seas, with colossal waves reaching the sky. Xiang Beifei had left the land of Hansha Kingdom and continued heading north. With his current strength at the Heavenly Connection realm, his speed of travel had increased by dozens of times. After traveling continuously for 10 days, he still hadn't reached Wuhou. As they passed a series of hills, a desolate beast in the late stages of God refining, a meaty rat, attacked them. Era barked loudly, grabbed it, and wanted to cook it. Xiang Beifei had no objection and stopped to rest. He observed the chubby rat, its short hands entwined as if it were very shy, its tearful little eyes blinking non-stop, its fur very smooth. At first glance, it appeared harmless and even emitted whining sounds, endearing itself to anyone. This meat rat's cry is crisp and tender, and it looks so cute. Let's braise it, Xiang Beifei said, stroking his chin. Woof! Xiaohe nodded excitedly. Though the meat rat looked cute, it was fiercely aggressive when it had attacked them, with fangs that could grow more than 10 meters long, showing no mercy as it lunged at them, even gnawing on rocks. Most importantly, the watery big eyes weren't just for show. They emitted a very strong, bewildering power, directly leading people into an illusion. Those with weak spiritual power would be directly consumed by its illusion technique. Unfortunately, it had bad luck in choosing its opponent. Wu! Era was also very happy, urging Xiang Beifei to bring out the skeleton's fire seeds. These flames were precious seasonings for Era. It remembered each type of flame ingredient very clearly. We still need to detoxify it, Xiang Beifei said calmly. This cute, desolate beast was covered in various toxins, not so easily neutralizable. Despite its slick fur, each hair was filled with toxins, and every piece of its flesh was highly poisonous. But this was no challenge for Xiang Beifei. His eyes flickered slightly, quickly seeing the rat in black and white lines. Xiang Beifei snapped his fingers. Burning Yin. Hum. The meat rat hadn't even had time to react before the toxins ignited, instantly turning to nothing. The meat rat's yin and yang imbalance also resulted in its immediate death. All right, it's edible now, but take it easy. Its meat is now full of yang, which can cause heatiness, Xiang Beifei said while controlling the skeleton's fire seeds, taking out a deep red flame, and started roasting the meat rat. It had to be said that the braised meat rat tasted very delicious, somewhat reminiscent of fried sauce noodles. He didn't recognize what kind of desolate beast it was. Up until now, most of the desolate beasts he had come across were unknown to him. All he could do was record them and then name them. It's plump and tastes like fried sauce noodles, so let's call it fried sauce rat. Xiang Beifei was very satisfied with this name. However, while they were eating, a sudden rustling sound came from the woods. A gust of wind blew, and a figure appeared at the edge of the tree. Xiang Beifei frowned slightly, raised his head to look, his gaze flickered slightly. It was actually a person. A sprightly girl, no more than 18 or 19 years old, roughly his age, wearing a clean white fragmented skirt, her skin fair, eyes large and bright, giving a clear impression. In this deep frontier wilderness, a place scarcely populated by people, the sight of her made Xiang Beifei's first reaction think of the ghost mustache of Remnant Visage. After all, any human appearance in this area couldn't be unconnected with the ghost mustache of Remnant Visage. But Xiang Beifei was quickly astonished, because there was no trace of the ghost mustache of Remnant Visage on this person, nor the pure and holy appearance typical of the moon god race. She was just a person. Could it be some other tribe? Xiang Beifei pondered. Taoist Qingyang had mentioned that humans were the most suitable creatures for cultivation in this world. All beings wishing to cultivate would evolve towards the human appearance because the human structure was conducive to pursuing the Tao. This world definitely had more than just the ghost mustache of Remnant Visage and the moon god race. There should be other races. But before Xiang Beifei had time to speak, the girl spoke first. Hello, the girl said. Xiang Beifei frowned slightly. This creature also spoke human language. But then, both the ghost mustache of Remnant Visage and the moon god race spoke human language. Untrustworthy. I don't know you, Xiang Beifei said. Oh right, the girl chuckled lightly. It's impolite of me. My name is Li Qianluo. Are you a friend from the Kangji Abyss? The Kangji Abyss? That place again. Xiang Beifei frowned, unable to determine exactly what the girl's background might be, and after pondering for a moment, he replied, Yes. Great. Li Qianluo seemed very pleased. My family said I would recognize the aura on you without mistake. After a while, she asked again, Are you also going to the Desert Stone Cave at Bone Mountain? Xiang Beifei was quite astonished. The Desert Stone Cave at Bone Mountain? This was a term that appeared in his grandfather's system interface, but what place was it? Xiang Beifei observed the girl named Li Qianluo, disguising his emotions as he said, Yes. That's great. It's on the way. Li Qianluo showed a relieved smile. This wilderness is too vast. I was just confirming the direction when I caught a scent and followed it here. Her gaze settled on the rat meat in Xiang Beifei's hand, gradually lighting up. Xiang Beifei was rather surprised. You can smell this? It's so fragrant. How could I not smell it? Li Qianluo sniffed gently, seemingly entranced by the aroma of the fried sauce rat, and enviously said, It drifted over from 10 miles away. But this only made Xiang Beifei even more astonished. To avoid attracting unnecessary desolate beasts and causing trouble for himself, he had specifically masked the scent of the fried sauce rat while cooking it. It should have been impossible to emit any smell, so how did this girl discover it? Xiang Beifei looked at Li Qianluo, and in his eyes, her entire being seemed to be shrouded in a black and white aura. A very strong aura. That was Xiang Beifei's first thought. May I try a bit? I'll trade you some jade flower wine for it. Li Qianluo pulled out a green gourd from nowhere, shook the gourd in her hand, and said, Meat should come with wine, right? I don't know you, Xiang Beifei calmly stated. I don't trust strangers. Li Qianluo clapped her hands as if she remembered something, cautiously said, Right. My family also tells me this. I almost forgot. You are a stranger too. She seemed to have just remembered this fact. How could she seem like someone naive without worldly experience? A relative of Era? Xiang Beifei glanced at Era lying beside him, gnawing on the fried sauce rat. Era, oblivious to Xiang Beifei's thoughts, casually scrutinized Li Qianluo while chewing. Li Qianluo thought for a moment and then said, Wait a moment. She suddenly turned and ran away, disappearing instantly. What speed? Xiang Beifei was quite astonished in his eyes. This girl was no ordinary being. But in this remote wilderness, how could there be someone so formidable? Xiang Beifei didn't have to wait long, just about 3 minutes, before Li Qianluo came rushing back, suddenly appearing with a loud boom, dragging a fried sauce rat along. She had actually gone out of her way to catch a fried sauce rat. Can I ask how you cooked this lady rat? I'd like to learn, so I won't have to eat your food. I mean, no harm, really, Li Qianluo assured. Her term for the beast differed from Xiang Beifei's. Xiang Beifei was silent for a moment and then said, Fine. He knew that ever since he had arrived in the outer wilderness, he had hardly encountered any real people. Meeting someone here, not to mention someone whose realm and cultivation were not weaker than his own, was a rare event. Especially since this girl seemed to be heading to the Desert Stone Cave at Bone Mountain, that place whose location was unknown. Detoxified, set the fire, cooked in soy sauce, all in one fluid motion. Li Qianluo watched the fried sauce rat eagerly. Only when Xiang Beifei finished roasting it and threw it to her did she hurriedly catch it, taking a bite with her eyes shining. Why does the one you roast taste different from ours? Li Qianluo, far from being demure, devoured it ravenously. Roasted with heart, Xiang Beifei said. Whose heart? The heart of a treasure wilderness bull. Li Qianluo pressed. The heart of a treasure wilderness bull can flavor many things. Xiang Beifei, how mismatched this conversation was. He didn't even know how to respond to her question. So he simply didn't, focusing instead on eating his own fried sauce rat. He didn't care what others called it. He called it fried sauce rat. Xiaohei and Era were eating too, while Yumong didn't eat meat. It just yawned there. Aren't you afraid it's poisoned? Xiang Beifei asked. Not afraid. I am immune to all poisons, Li Qianluo said indistinctly. Xiang Beifei raised his eyebrows, sizing up this character. Something reminded Li Qianluo, and she passed a wine gourd over enthusiastically. Jade flower wine for you. It's brewed from the nectar of hundreds of millennium flowers from our place. Tastes great. No thanks, Xiang Beifei said. Try it, mine's not poisoned. Just like the meat you roasted. Li Qianluo generously thrust a wine gourd into Xiang Beifei's hands. She still had one herself, taking another swig, alternating between sips of wine and bites of meat, eating joyously. Xiang Beifei wasn't afraid of poison. With his abilities, he truly wasn't worried about toxins. He pulled out the stopper, and a fragrance of wine wafted out, tantalizing his taste buds, and he could faintly see the carefree spirit of the wine within the aroma. The wine indeed was not poisoned. Xiang Beifei could even discern each type of nectar used in brewing the wine, crystal clear. As he pondered, Era next to him cheekily stretched out a tail as if it were a paw, dipped it into the gourd, scooped up some wine and started lapping it up. Immediately, Era's face showed a blissful expression, slowly stretching out his limbs, then turned entirely limp. Woo! Era, blissfully twirling his tail, spun around non-stop, bubbling with joy. Right there on the ground next to it, strange flowers suddenly blossomed. Have you seen these millennium flowers before? Li Qianluo exclaimed in surprise. The flowers created by the wooden kirin were the ingredients for the jade flower wine. Woo! Era indicated nonchalantly that this was nothing, it could do much more. Then you're really amazing. Li Qianluo seemed to understand Era's cries. Xiang Beifei kicked at Era, who blinked innocently but swiftly dipped back into the gourd for another sip. I still don't know your name, Li Qianluo said. Xiang Beifei. What an interesting name, Li Qianluo said. Xiang Beifei didn't care, continuing, How much do you know about the desert stone cave at Bone Mountain? Not much. Just heard from my family about the ancient heritage left by Edge Corner Airspace coming into the world. Wanted to go out and see more of the world. How about you? Li Qianluo asked. Ancient heritage? What was that? Pretty much the same. Heard that the ancient heritage is quite impressive, Xiang Beifei said seriously. Actually, he knew nothing, but it didn't stop him from acting knowledgeable. Exactly. A lot of people from various races will be going there. Everyone wants to try their luck. Li Qianluo nodded. A lot of people from various races. Besides the ghost whiskers and meat-winged monster, Xiang Beifei had yet to see any other races. Too bad I'm lost. The wilderness is too vast. Xiang Beifei spread his hands. Ha, you're in luck, I know. Li Qianluo gestured, swiftly devouring the remaining fried sauce rat. Then with a surge of spiritual power, she cleared all the residues from her hands. Let's go. She leaped into the air, waving at Xiang Beifei. Xiang Beifei, pulling along Xiaohe and Era, followed her. The two quickly headed north. Soon Xiang Beifei was surprised to find that they were heading in the direction of Wuhou. You don't even know the road yet dare to venture alone into the wilderness beyond the realm. Did you sneak out of your house? Li Qianluo asked cheerfully. Couldn't stand the solitude, snuck out without telling the adults, right? Xiang Beifei glanced sidelong at Li Qianluo. Why did he feel like she was a bit of a pot calling the kettle black? But he simply spread his hands, non-committal. No worries, we look out for each other. My dad says, when away from home, having another friend is better than having another enemy. Li Qianluo said righteously. That's good. Xiang Beifei nodded slightly. All the way there, he pondered about the things of Edge Corner Airspace. What exactly was that place? What existence was that place, that an inheritance caused such a stir? Because according to Taoist Qingyang, the Tao embryo of the human race, also the system ability, originated from Edge Corner Airspace. And, according to what Yi Ji and Brain Deficient had mentioned, the aura of the woofing broken sword that Xiang Beifei held seemed to originate from Edge Corner Airspace. Did that mean his grandfather had been to Edge Corner Airspace, which led to the powerful woofing being broken? Could it be that his grandfather's memory loss in the immortal realm was also caused at Edge Corner Airspace? With indirect questions, Xiang Beifei inquired about Edge Corner Airspace from Li Qianluo along the way. But she was vague, not too clear about it either. Though he didn't figure out specifics about Edge Corner Airspace, he inadvertently learned many details about the E-tribe. Li Qianluo said she came from the Treely race, naturally appearing human-like, and had good relations generationally with those from Kangji Abyss, which is why she felt a closeness upon seeing Xiang Beifei. Xiang Beifei originally wanted to ask what exactly it meant to come from the Extremity Abyss, but considering he was now regarded as a person from the Extremity Abyss, he couldn't very well act as if he didn't recognize it, so he held back from asking. It was Li Qianluo, however, who asked a lot about the Extremity Abyss. "Oh right. Have you guys from the Extremity Abyss been searching for the legendary mustard seed in Palm? And have you found it?" Li Qianluo asked curiously. Xiang Beifei was slightly stunned. Li Qianluo didn't mention the mustard seed in Palm. He had even forgotten about that wisp of mist in his hand. It had been sealed inside the chamber constellation of his spirit-gathering book all along, and Xiang Beifei still didn't know what it was for. Seeing the contemplative look on Xiang Beifei's face, Li Qianluo couldn't help but laugh and said, "I'm just kidding. That thing is like a myth to you guys. It's not something you can find so easily." Xiang Beifei spread his hands. "Why are you as silent as a block of wood? Say something," Li Qianluo asked. "You've said everything there is to say. What else is there for me to add?" Xiang Beifei replied. "Oh really? My mother also says I talk too much. I just like talking to people. She says it can be annoying. Sorry about that. I'll talk less from now on," Li Qianluo said cheerfully. "It's fine. I prefer listening to others talk." "Ha! That's great. I knew we'd get along well. You look like you haven't seen much of the world. Let me tell you more about it." Li Qianluo was very enthusiastic. The two chatted on and off, with most of the talking done by Li Qianluo, who was like a chatterbox, capable of discussing anything from an orifice-transforming phase great flying crane in the sky to how its baby cranes would somersault, to debating with Xiang Beifei whether a particular cloud resembled a bell horse a bit more or a little bell horse. Xiang Beifei had no idea what a bell horse was. Shouldn't a big bell horse just be an adult version of a little bell horse? How could they be different? But after talking for a while, he realized that big bell horses and little bell horses were two completely different desolate beasts. After flying for about 4 to 5 hours, Xiang Beifei was constantly correcting the direction of his mound spirit, which turned out to be spot on. Just then, a huge roaring sound came from a forest ahead, and the violent spiritual power surged out, toppling the trees of an entire forest. "There are powerful warriors fighting. It must be high-level warriors from other races who got here first. Let's go. Let's go watch the fun," Li Qianluo said excitedly, unable to contain herself. "Okay." Xiang Beifei nodded slightly. He was also curious about what these E-tribes were like. They circled around a tall mountain and leaped to the top of a cliff, hiding behind a large rock, and stealthily poked their heads out. Two powerful figures stood in the air. Or rather, they looked like two people. One was an extremely muscular man, his muscles grotesquely bulging and pronounced, bare-chested, with just a piece of black beast skin wrapped around his waist. The skin emitted a faint black light and had a strong aura circulating within it, clearly not an ordinary item. Everything about this fellow was almost human, except for a curved horn growing from the back of his head extending to the forehead. The horn was peculiar and could emit a golden light. Xiang Beifei wondered why the guy's horn wasn't growing at the front, even if ascending to the sky from the middle of his head would have been more harmonious. He had to do it in such an awkward way. His opponent was another young man, whose clothes, made of some unknown material, were soft like water and indeed flowing. Every movement he made, his clothes would perfectly cover him. And this young man differed from humans in that his left hand was a large pincer, akin to a giant crab evolved into a human, but the arm wasn't fully evolved. Looks like high-level warriors from the Panjiao race and the Sodding race have clashed. The inheritance event of the Edge Corner airspace hasn't even begun, and they're already fighting. It's so thrilling. I feel like this is just the beginning, Li Qianluo said. Boom! During the conversation, Two E-Trib members from the Panjiao race and Soding race had already started fighting. The Panjiao man charged over very aggressively, swung his huge fist, and threw a punch. Terrifying spiritual power fluctuations burst out on his fist, forming a golden light that shattered the clouds in the sky and struck straight at the large pincer man's face. However, the large pincer man, with a cold face, click-clack, waved his large pincers, which suddenly grew huge, directly shredding the punch's wind. He let out a loud shout, and the rolling sound waves turned into giant ripples that wrapped around the Panjiao youth. Crack! In an instant, the large pincer man closed in, arriving behind the Panjiao youth. With a swing of his pincer, he intended to snap the Panjiao youth's neck. But at that moment, the curved horns at the back of the Panjiao youth's head rapidly split apart. Standing erect beside him, crack! The horns blocked the large pincer's snapping attack, and he turned around with a punch, blasting the large pincer man flying with a thunderous bang. The horns of the Panjiao race are extremely hard, capable of forming various defenses around the body, and can be used for offense as well. The large pincers of the Soding race are very sharp, but they cannot cut through those horns. Li Qianluo, treating Xiang Beifei as a rebellious young man who had always been kept at home without exposure to the world, enthusiastically began to introduce the characteristics of the Panjiao and Soding races to Xiang Beifei and analyzed them in great detail. But Xiang Beifei wasn't very concerned about why the two were fighting. What surprised him more was that upon seeing these two E-Trib members, he seemed to perceive some very strange things from them. That feeling couldn't be clearly defined, but it was very peculiar. Both of these E-Trib members had high cultivation levels in the late orifice transforming phase, almost half a step into the heavenly connection realm. Of course, such cultivation wasn't much in Xiang Beifei's eyes, but for some reason, there seemed to be something swirling around them. What could it be? Xiang Beifei pondered slightly. Then his eyes flashed a faint light, and soon he treated the two's aura as black and white figures. The black and white spiritual power maintained a balance, but atop the Panjiao Trib member's head, at the horns, a golden light flickered. This golden light diffused slightly, merging into the surrounding air. Xiang Beifei watched the golden light above the Panjiao's head in surprise because the gold diffused into the sky, as if it was merging with heaven and earth, continuously communicating spiritual power with heaven and earth. To step into the heavenly connection realm from the late phase of orifice transforming, one must first merge with heaven and earth to comprehend the heavenly Tao laws. And this Panjiao man looked like he was about to communicate with the heavenly Tao. Xiang Beifei then looked towards the Soding race man on the other side, the oddly dressed man whose large pincer on the left hand was also emitting a blue light. This light was particularly conspicuous in the black and white world and invisible to normal people. Could it be that the E-Trib people also possess Tao embryos? Xiang Beifei suddenly realized. Taoist Qingyang had mentioned that the human race is favored by the heavens and is the most perfect race for cultivating the heavenly Tao laws, which is why desolate beasts with spiritual intelligence all evolve towards humans, and it is the Tao embryo that allows humans to cultivate. In Juzhou, the form of the Tao embryo had been modified by Xiang Beifei's grandfather into a system using some method, and Xiang Beifei on the Juzhou continent was the master of the system, capable of controlling all awakener systems. No matter how the system turned out, its essence remained the Tao embryo, and what Xiang Beifei could actually control was the Tao embryo. If the E-Trib people also cultivated using Tao embryos, it meant he could control the E-Trib's Tao embryos as well. This discovery surprised Xiang Beifei. Since he had comprehended the Tao and stepped into the heavenly connection realm, he hadn't encountered the ghostly visage with ghost whiskers or the meat-winged monster, and thus hadn't noticed this matter, but now he had to seriously consider this ability. How then should I interfere with these E-Trib people's Tao embryos? Xiang Beifei's mind rapidly began to ponder.